OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
Alright, it's Tuesday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Ger with you all the way through until 10. If you want to get in touch, you can leave a comment in the YouTube stream, or you can get us wherever you're consuming us right now. We are live across a multitude of platforms. Owen, good morning to you. How are you?
Very well, Ger. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good. Obviously disappointed that Villa couldn't do something last night against Manchester United, when they definitely in the second half were the better team. Significantly better, I thought.
VAR screwed you over. Is this what we're all gathered around to hear about this morning?
I don't know. I'm bored of VAR. Like, what are you going to do? They definitely seemed like they were trying to find any way they could possibly find to disallow that goal.
And then they correctly ruled it out. So, I mean, all's well that ends well.
Doesn't really seem to make that much of sense. Like, you know, I mean, there might have been two offsides. Did the offsides? They couldn't find the offside. Is that what happened? And that's why they went back for the, like, man holding his ground running into other man foul.
It's like when you kind of are trying to find your mouse on your screen and you just can't find it. You're like, where the hell did the mouse go? And you're there struggling for about 4 or 5 minutes. That's what happened with VAR in that moment. They just lost track of it.
Look, we need Man United in the cup. It's such a giant money spinner that poor little Villa against Borough isn't going to get the business done for whoever has the rights for the fourth round of the FA Cup.
No, it certainly won't. Like, the thing is, Aston Villa have figured Manchester United out last night, and they get a chance to do it in the big boys competition this weekend.
Well, the last time that Villa played Man United, it was at Old Trafford, and Villa won 1-0, but Man United battered them and had like a missed penalty and 14 chances, and Villa scored from set piece. Now, in fairness, they nearly scored from a few set pieces around that time, but that was all they did. That was the only opportunity they had, and it was Dean Smith's last win before he then went on that 5-game losing streak that cost him his job. Completely different game in terms of the team that was doing most of the nice, pretty football, and ultimately the same result, where one team kind of smash and grabs with a header against the other. But I'd rather be Villa now than Villa then, where it looked like they were trying to. I thought Buendia was excellent. I was surprised he got taken off. So I don't know. What are you going to do?
Yeah, like they
need a striker who can score goals.
That would help for sure. They should have two of them in the squad, I think. Like, I just feel that while we were kind of singing his praises yesterday, there is just a sense that Ollie Watkins is the type of guy who looks like he could score 50 goals a season and will come away with 10. And it's just such a frustrating watch at times looking at him, because he seems to have so much in his locker. He looks like he could go on a run that, say, Danny Ings has gone on at previous times in his career, but it just hasn't happened for him for various reasons so far. Last night was just a bit of bad luck, I think, from his perspective. Maybe the big opportunity he gets, he just goes too high with the opportunity. But I don't know. I think that there's enough talent in that attack to suggest that they will turn a corner and may find a prolific goal scorer or two within that attack. But the evidence so far is that that sharp edge is still missing up front.
Yeah,
a little bit. They're kind of the cold killer. The Mo Salah-esque. Not that anybody's going to get to Mo Salah's level, but the sort of scoring goals that they shouldn't be scoring almost is what Villa haven't been doing so far. That they need big opportunities to bang a few in.
Yeah, I didn't check the XG, but it feels like Villa need a high XG per goal over the course of certainly the season so far. Whereas last year, actually, there's a good chance that Ollie Watkins would have scored 3 times last night, and it would have been, this guy should be playing for England. But he's very close. He's very close, and it, like, you know, the bit where he turns Lindelof and smacks it off the crossbar, you're like, that's inches away from being world class.
Yeah.
Like, the pace, the power, the touch, it looks like it's gone in the wrong place, but actually it's gone the one place where you have enough room to get your shot away, and it beats the hair. But it cannons back off, and even if it cannons down as opposed to back, you know, so it's centimeters away from being like really, really brilliant. And
but Watkins has sort of joined the queue of central attackers who've navigated out wide in some sort of attempt. Like, I guess the reason why he's navigated out wide is because Danny Ings is at the club, and it's been by necessity. But I wonder, from his perspective, if a full season playing on the left or on the right, as it was last night, wasn't it? That actually he could just turn into some sort of player who is going to cut in and be a lot more prolific than he was. Like, I went to the XG philosophy to see what their XG was last night. I can't find it, but they have tweeted a few days ago that Philippe Coutinho scored 17 goals from 24.53 XG over the course of the last 4 seasons. I don't know what that means, and I don't know whether or not that's a good thing or whether or not Aston Villa fans
when he
should
have scored 24. Look, you can see how the team is improving, and they're a good team, they're good to watch, and it's great that this is a team who now goes to Old Trafford and expects to come away and is really disappointed, as opposed to, you know, the last 15 years where it's been like, oh, are we going to get relegated this season? No, we did get relegated. Are we going to get back up? I'm not sure. Not sure what's going to happen here. Will we get relegated again? Maybe. Who knows? And, you know, this is not a team that needs Jack Grealish anymore, for example. So that's progress. That's how broken we are.
Yeah, I mean, and also you're not Manchester United in this constant holding pattern where, despite winning, I think it's very hard to make a case that the mood music has got any better after last night.
Well, the picture of Rashford and Bruno on the bench with 3 or 4 minutes left to go, you know, 2 very important players for you, you'd think, trying to defend a lead and then just not being able to do it well, and then you take them off and the picture of them looking pretty devastated. That was interesting. That was like that was kind of a neat summation of where Man United's best players are at the moment. Kind of lost, a little bit forlorn, not quite sure of their identity.
I sometimes get the sense that Rangnick thinks that they're not up to the task of taking lessons on board. I don't think really he thinks that he's got a bad set of players at all. I just think that maybe there's a sense of, I've got great ideas in football and you guys don't have it within you to learn. Like, even on Friday when he was doing his, I think it was Friday, and he was doing his press conference, he said that the squad are at least trying to take his ideas on board. I'm sure that they are listening, he said, which kind of has this sense of, listen, my ideas are great, it's just up to the players to try and take this on and to listen, and it's not necessarily to do with their abilities. Last night I think I'm not sure if Rangnick is the type of man who pats himself on the back quite a bit, but certainly he felt that his move to bring Van de Beek in and try and combat the 3 central midfielders they were up against is something that worked out well. So
what did he say? I didn't see it.
So he said, like, the game against Villa today confirmed with a minimum 3 central midfielders, we had problems in times of the game to control the centre of the pitch. Then from the moment when we changed to a diamond in the last 20 minutes when Donny came on, from then on we controlled the game. We had our counter-attack situations. Then he blames bad decisions in the final third for not having scored a second goal.
He's right about that.
For sure. What's going to be interesting now is that Rangnick now has a second go at this. Does he then go into Saturday night's game and start with the diamond? He's playing the same team. Aston Villa, probably start with the same 11. Good chance Coutinho maybe makes his debut, and maybe that's your...
Do you start Coutinho? I'm not sure. Do you? It depends on how fit he is. I don't know how fit and how much football he's played.
But chances are, like, I mean, yeah, maybe not. Maybe you do start with Ramsey, Louise and McGinn, and you have to start, like, if Coutinho is going to come in, it will be for one of the front 3. So in terms of that midfield,
I think it's with Danny Ings, I have to say.
Yeah.
I definitely, I'm looking at the list of mediocre strikers that Newcastle are being linked with, and I think cash in on Danny Ings, get that money back and go and sign somebody who's a younger version.
Do you not think Danny Ings has just gone through a little bit of a blip so far this season, and that he will come good eventually for Aston Villa?
I don't think he is a pressing centre forward. I don't think he's a lone centre striker in the style that Villa are trying to have that front 3. Like, could you play Ings, Buendia and Coutinho? Maybe you could. Maybe he'd be perfect for that. But like, I don't know.
This is a fella who scored 25 goals 2 seasons ago. Granted, that was in all competitions. Very hard to replace that from a standpoint of Aston Villa, especially when you look at someone like Watkins, who isn't going to be that guy just yet, it seems. And of course, he's been prolific in the Championship and has definitely shown.
Oh, I'm saying you've got to reinvest the money in somebody else, like, because it looks like they're interested in signing loads of players. I don't know if they are, but like, certainly the rumours would suggest that they are. But to go back to United, so he says he is a bit of a genius and fixed the scenario that by lashing on Donny van de Beek, and they went to a diamond and they controlled the game for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, and the fast wingers kind of came into play here, and then I guess he goes on to say how it's all about balance, offensive and defensive balance, and we have players whose strengths are up front when we are in possession of the ball, but in order to control and dominate the game, you have to have possession of the ball and make the best out of that possession. Like, he does go into his formation quite a bit after every single press conference, it seems, Rangnick. It is his... it is his go-to mode when he is analysing a game, rather than, the underperformance of the players or bad week in training or say some of the more human elements. It is very functional, Rangnick's appraisal of his team in every single game. So it will be interesting when we're judging it. It will be a pretty black and white answer on Saturday whether or not he's sticking with his guns for Saturday. But if he's found something here that worked against this Aston Villa team, why wouldn't you start that way?
Well, it has to. He's got to back it up by picking the same team that finished at the weekend and going with the diamond if that's what he thinks is going to be effective. Roddy Collins is sticking to his guns in the Star this morning. United need a boss with the right toque, and he's saying that if Thomas Tuchel is actually on the way out, if the clock is indeed Henry Winter-esque ticking on Thomas Tuchel at the moment, which it may well be, right? It may well be ticking because of the in recent weeks, Roddy says Tuchel has had to deal with the Lukaku TV interview, and there was some suggestions of unrest between him and the Chelsea hierarchy. If I was the incoming Manchester United CEO, Richard Arnold, and those suggestions start again, I'd be sitting outside Stamford Bridge with a contract in my hand for Tuchel, which is so he's talking about Klopp, Pep, Tuchel and Conte, 4 world-class coaches, right? But he does not think Ralph Rangnick is a world-class manager. Rangnick's methods are full of coaching manual spoofology. He's been on the Rangnick is a spoofer train since Rangnick arrived amidst much fanfare, and he is sticking to his guns. They've got to admire Roddy for sticking to his guns. I think a lot of people are certainly the non-Man United fans are like, well, this is kind of interesting, isn't it? How's Rangnick working out for you guys? Oh, not so well.
Roddy Collins got in on this at ground level, really. He bought stocks on Rangnick as a spoofer at a very, very cheap price, and they're starting to show a bit of an uptick at the moment, and maybe his stocks are going to go to the moon eventually, because it was a brave thing to do, I thought, at the time. It seemed jarring, actually, that somebody would be calling him a spoofer because he hadn't actually managed many games with Manchester United. Obviously, he had insight from doing his coaching badges or something, or crossing paths with him during their various coaching careers and education. So he has a bit of an insight on it, and I think right now you have to say that there are fewer eyebrows being raised with that Rangnick is a spoofer take now than there would have been 2 months ago. Still think it's
I don't
way
think
too
Rangnick
soon,
is
though.
a spoofer, though.
That's the thing, and
it is possible that Rangnick's involvement in the background at Manchester United is going to be the right thing for Manchester United in the long run. But at the moment, maybe the squad is ungovernable. I don't know.
As a manager, they could well be at the end of the season that Rangnick just hasn't worked out well whatsoever. The intrigue is obviously going to be his role as an advisor to Manchester United, and what sort of impact he will have, what sort of impact he allows himself to have, and if you don't believe in the methods of the manager, how are you going to believe in him to advise correctly to appoint the next manager, would be what I say. Well,
I suppose you can be a genius director of football but not a very good football manager. They're different things. I think they are. I know loads of people in football don't think they are, and that you should be there should be one man in charge of everything, and that you should be able to split your time between world-class recruitment and world-class coaching and management, and it doesn't seem to be the case these days. OTB AM brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, with your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Give us your views on the Manchester United Villa game last night. Should Ralph Rangnick stick with the same team, put his money where his mouth is last night, and was that finally the revolution that they needed? Stick Donny van de Beek in the team. That's all they needed. If only Ole Gunnar Solskjaer had thought of this, maybe he'd still be in a job. On the Villa miss, an inch may well be a mile, says David McLean. I know this. I mean, that's the whole point. That's the shot that hits the crossbar is a bad shot. Barbalatza 83 says absolutely shambolic from VAR. They spent 6 minutes looking for any possible way to disallow Villa's equaliser. If I was a cynic, it did feel that way. It did feel like they were like, first offside, can't prove that's offside. Second offside, I mean, I'd like to give it, but I can't. And now it's like, oh, there was this other thing over there. There's this definitely other thing over there. Because, if you look back on Watkins' chance, right? When he skins Lindelof puts his hand on him and pulls his shirt. So in the act of nearly scoring, he has his shirt pulled. So technically you go back for that because that's a penalty. It's a shirt pull in the penalty area. But they didn't go back for that. You have to wonder why. I'm not a cynic.
No, he's got to go to ground. You get your shirt pulled, you got to go to ground.
You shouldn't have to. It's like, oh yeah, Lindelof, you screwed up, you got skinned again, you gave away a penalty, yellow card, penalty.
Bernardo Silva New Year's Day doesn't get that penalty unless he goes to ground. It's the rule number one of shirt pulling. you've got to get pulled to the ground, it seems. Yeah.
All right. Shermerful says Ronaldo out. That's also Roddy's on that one as well. He's like he's saying that he was seen standing over Bruno Fernandes before a free kick against Wolves. What was he doing there? Roddy asks rhetorically. Okay, so we've got the power rankings coming up in a moment, but we've got to go to Novak Djokovic, winners and losers. There are many winners and losers, and we like nothing more than winners and losers. This is a sports show where you get results. You get to see at the end in the scoreboard who the winner and the loser is. Our metaphorical scoreboard is up and running, Owen. Who are the winners and losers from the Djokovic?
Yeah, the tentacles of the story have invaded many different areas of public life all around the world. I think it's fair to say. So we'll go through just some of the winners and some of the losers. We couldn't possibly go through them all today. The first winner, the big winner over the last week, is Nigel Farage. And this was an easy win to hand out. He has somehow managed to take a little piece of pie of the story and make it all about himself, and he is therefore a winner in all of this. So Nigel Farage speaking to Eamon Holmes from Novak Djokovic's gaffe on GB News is not something that many of us would have seen coming a couple of months ago, but I think we can already write 2022 off as a batshit crazy year. So let's have a look at him entering the Djokovic trophy room yesterday and have a listen to some of the other people in the room.
This is pretty amazing.
Hi, how are you? Welcome on the party. Welcome on the party.
Yeah, I know you. You can hear a woman say in the background, I know you. You're the guy who says Chucky Garlaw on Cameo. You're the guy who says Up the Ra on Cameo. You're the guy who did that beautiful rendition of Sean South of Gary Owen on Cameo. I mean, the Nigel Farage thing is very, very interesting. And what you had then afterwards was Andy Murray quote tweeting that video. I'm sure you all saw this, where he said, please record the awkward moment when you tell them you spent most of your career campaigning to have people from Eastern Europe deported, which Farage then responded to via quote tweet himself, saying, Dear Andy, you clearly don't understand politics or the Brexit campaign, but are filled with prejudice. Concentrate on the tennis. Concentrate on the tennis is an interesting one from Nigel Farage. Stay in your lane, Andy. Follow my example, Andy. This week, Andy, I stayed in my lane by flying to Belgrade and immersing myself in the universe of a professional tennis player in order to give myself a pretty good soapbox for my political views. I am a leech, but I will criticise anybody else who enjoys the art of blood-sucking. So either way, it doesn't matter. This has been a massive success story of a week for Nigel Farage, and that was an easy win to hand out. Our first loser this morning is the Park Hotel in Melbourne, which has taken one hell of a hit over the past few days. This was a hotel that I guess a week ago most people had never heard of, a place that was distinctly average and relatively inoffensive. Here's the hotel's description on TripAdvisor. The Park Hotel Melbourne is the perfect choice for business and leisure accommodation, functions, meetings and events. Enjoy views across Lincoln Square Gardens and Melbourne's CBD skyline, while perfectly located to enjoy all that Melbourne has to offer. An ideal venue for Melbourne accommodation, your next conference or gala event, and a superb wedding reception location in Melbourne. The Park Hotel Melbourne is sure to delight. And as you can see there, the reviews are excellent. 4.0, 4.5
reviews, yeah?
Excellent, yeah. 720 reviews and an average of 4.0. Not bad at all. And when you've got the world's best tennis player in your hotel, there might be a temptation to suggest that there is no such thing as bad publicity. But I'm going to stick my neck out here and suggest that the surge in publicity may not lead to a surge in popularity for the Park Hotel Melbourne. Here are just three things that I think will impact its appeal to tourists and potentially impact its TripAdvisor ratings over the next little while. Number one, something referred to as a detention centre is probably not the most appealing destination for holidaymakers. Number two, the meal reviews from detainees have included reports of mouldy food and the presence of maggots on food. Very happy breakfast time to everybody with us this morning. And number three, some of the detainees are refugees who've been held in the country for up to 9 years so far as part of their indefinite detention, marking the Park Hotel as a monument of some of the worst elements of Australia's immigration policy. But quite whether the Park Hotel manages to uphold its 4.0 rating on TripAdvisor, time will tell, because at the end of the day, it is a superb wedding reception if they do say so themselves. The next winner, back to the winners, and it's E! Entertainment up next. Now, the easy thing to suggest here after this controversy is that Netflix might eventually be the big winner of this saga, but in reality, we all know that the rights to the Djokovic story should go to E! Entertainment. We need Keeping Up with the Djokovic's to be made ASAP. Djokovic's mother yesterday suggesting that her son had been tortured is exactly the sort of content we want in the show, while Djokovic's brother is a fine master of the art of the cliffhanger, as demonstrated in yesterday's press conference.
Was he at an event on the 17th of December?
Okay, so this press conference is adjourned at the moment. Thank you for attention. Hvala svima još jednom što ste došli.
The real star of Keeping Up with Djokovic, though, would be Novak Djokovic's father, who has become a superstar over the last week, comparing his son to water, comparing his son to Jesus, comparing his son to Spartacus, and then calling on Queen Elizabeth to intervene and protect Novak's human rights. He is Kris Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner, Kim Kardashian, all wrapped up into one soon-to-be massive superstar of reality TV. Make it happen, E! Entertainment. They would be the big winners from this. The next loser is the Serbian National Postal Service, and this is the part of the story that really grinds my gears. We should be talking about what really matters, about what a great job the Serbian National Postal Service did on this stamp. It is a beautiful stamp, and I've always been a big fan of the Serbian National Postal Service. This is coming from an Unpost fan here. But no, instead we're talking about how Novak Djokovic has ruined everything for fans of the Serbian National Postal Service. The stamp was unveiled the day Djokovic tested positive for COVID, and this photo of Djokovic accepting what is a framed version, I think, of the stamp has become a pruder film of our generation. That poor guy on the left, the JFK of our generation.
Back and to the left.
To make matters worse then, on top of all of this, the Serbian Postal Service were put under undue pressure by Novak Djokovic, I think it's fair to say, because he replied to that photo on social media saying, "Gratitude for everyone that brought this together. Now Jelena Djokovic and I will take some stamps home for the kids to write to Santa." Note the date on that tweet. A December 17 letter to Santa is outrageously risky behaviour. That is way riskier than not getting yourself vaccinated. Did the Serbian Postal Service manage to get that thing delivered on time is a question I have. Or did the kids in the Djokovic household not get a visit from the big man? I would like to see these questions answered, and I think they need to be answered with urgency. But the National Service of Post in Serbia, you are a loser, unfortunately, from the last week. The next winner is a household name of sport. She is no longer the CEO of Australian Open COVID infamy. The last 12 months have been a whirlwind, so you might have forgotten the name Vanessa Sierra. She is a winner. Let me remind you that Vanessa Sierra is the now ex-girlfriend of Australian tennis player Bernard Tomic, and she was, of course, the star of the COVID saga of January 2021 with this truly heartbreaking story of hardship.
This is the worst part of quarantine. I don't wash my own hair. I've never washed my own hair. It's just not something that I do. I normally have hairdressers that do it twice a week for me.
A massive win for her personally, that now Novak Djokovic is more than likely going to go down as the person we all remember from the COVID era in relation to the Australian Open. Now, I'm sure you're all interested in how Sierra's channel has progressed since January last year on YouTube. You can see that she is on hand to give you all the advice you need to invest your entire savings in crypto. Her basic guide there you can see in the thumbnail, which reads, "Quit your job with crypto like I did." So it's fair to say that she has come a long way from not being able to use Head and Shoulders on herself last January. And then finally, our last loser is jovial New Year's sentiment. We all love a bit of jovial New Year's sentiment. We all love texting our entire contacts book at 1 minute past midnight on New Year's Day to wish them health, love and joy for the year ahead. But I regret to inform you that jovial New Year's sentiment has taken quite the battering over the past week or so, because let's not forget Djokovic's 2022 tweet to get this year up and running. "Happy New Year," he said, "wishing you all health, love and joy in every moment, and may you feel love and respect towards all beings on this wonderful planet. I've spent fantastic quality time with loved ones over the break, and today I'm heading down under with an exception permission. Let's go 2022. You can file that straight under images that precede unfortunate events. But anyone of you at home, I guess, who tweeted "New Year, New Me," you are already on track to having a better New Year than Novak Djokovic. You're making a better hack of it than Novak Djokovic is of his New Year's resolution. So congratulations, I guess you are a winner in all of this as well, if you've had any sort of New Year sentiment in a positive sense.
Oh, great stuff. The Australian Border Force, by the way, are investigating whether or not Novak Djokovic incorrectly declared that he had not travelled and would not do so for 2 weeks before his flight to Australia. In the latest twist in his visa cancellation saga, the Guardian report this morning, questions have been raised about the declaration completed by an agent for Djokovic with social media posts, which Eoin has just pointed to, seemingly showing he was in Belgrade on Christmas Day before flying to Australia from Spain on the 4th of January. So perhaps he will be hoisted by his own petard. It is 7:55 this morning. You can give us your views on the Djokovic saga. I know that certainly our Twitter feed has been aflame with those who are defending Novak Djokovic and his actions over the last while. And keep it going. We can take it. Come on, keep it going. At Off the Ball AM, at Ger Gilroy, at Owen Cian. There are our Twitter handles. You can tag us in directly because it's a useful tool for me when I go mute and then say bye-bye. This is great. I never have to see any of your shit again. So that's how that works. But you can also leave a comment on the YouTube stream. Here's what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock. We're going to do the power rankings. Samuel Luckhurst is going to talk to us from the Manchester Evening News about the Manchester United situation at the moment. We'll get into the weeds of what players want to leave, why they want to leave, who feels like they haven't been given a fair shake, what the situation is with Pogba, etc, etc, etc. If you have any specific Man United questions you'd like to ask Samuel, get in touch. The sport pages at 8:30. We'll have sports news with John Duggan at 8:40. Cian Tracey is going to run us through the situation at Munster. New contracts handed out, only a year for Ben Healy. I wonder at whose instigation that was. Is he keeping his options open, as you would be at this stage given the interest in him from around the world? And then we'll play it out with Jerry Thornley and Fiona Coughlin a little bit later on. It is 7:56 though, on the 11th of January 2022. It's time for the first power rankings of the year.
Some of these critics, these pundits,
I absolutely adore them lads. I have unbelievable time for them, but they're a great bunch, but it's not acceptable.
that like to play the hard man when they're on it. It's not very pleasant when you're trying to manage a team. All you're looking for is a bit of civility and a bit of decency, but they just dismiss you like you know, you have nothing to do with the bloody occasion.
It's too early for this, isn't it? Like, isn't it too early in the year?
No.
I don't mean from my perspective. I mean from the public's perspective.
No, they're dying for this. So, and it's like there's been a gaping void in their lives over the last few months that you refuse to step into because last year, let's face it, didn't work out so well. You had the Dubs number one the whole way through. You probably had the number one even after Tyrone won.
Well, my point is that I guess is it just too early in the year for people to be corrected and to be given the most correct, flawless power rankings of all time. Like, I mean, January is a year of, you know, letting yourself go a little bit. I mean, like, finish off the extra chocolate food or Christmas food, chocolates, whatever it may be. Treat yourself to being lazy. There's no need for people to be going out of their way being corrected on their GAA takes, but I guess it's something we just have to do on this show. So the power rankings are here, the most correct power rankings. This is exactly how things are going to play out this year with absolutely no exceptions. We'll go from county number 32 all the way up to county number 1, and I mean, I'm personally excited for the return of London this year, who were in at number 32, left out in the wilderness for the last couple of years, but they will be back. Could they make a move off bottom spot over the next little while? At number 31 is Waterford. At number 30 is Leitrim. Number 29 is Sligo. 28 is Carlow. 27 is Wicklow, and at number 26 is Louth, and at 25 is Wexford.
You're not giving Andy Moran any of a bit of a bounce, nothing?
Not until we see it. I mean, this is, like, I guess what we're doing here is we didn't properly assess where everybody landed at the end of 2021. I guess there was just enough to talk about when it came to Tyrone's results. We didn't actually look elsewhere, and what I'm judging a lot of this on is the performances of last year, not necessarily the results per se, because we'll get to that in a little while, but the performances. I think there might have been a bit of a skewing of certain counties here and there, but so until we see the Andy Moran effect on Leitrim, they won't be moving off that spot. So they're in 30th at the moment.
Dara O'Toole says we should name this entire segment Happy New Year.
Very good. Well, we'll see. Maybe they're in at number 1. Who knows? So that I would say that those first 8 counties we went through there are part of the bottom tier, and I think the bottom tier kind of continues as we move on to the next page. So when at number 24 is Laois. Laois had a bad year last year, so they'll be hoping to get back up and I guess try and have some sort of promotion challenge getting out of Division 3 this year, and some sort of championship that doesn't look like a 16-point defeat to Westmeath, which is how things began and ended for them last year. It was a bit of a disaster for them. And I had Longford and Antrim in that tier as well. So up to 22, I would say, is the sort of bottom tier. I would give Antrim every chance of progressing this year as well. They're at the top of that tier.
Right, this is getting interesting now. Tip behind Limerick.
Yeah, so if you move on then to what I think is the middle tier, like I do think you can maybe make a case that Antrim are on the edge. If we move on to the middle tier, really, which is Fermanagh at 21, all the way up to number 14, which we'll get to in a while. So it's Fermanagh at 21, Tip at 20, Limerick at 19, Cavan at 18, and Down at 17. And I did look back at our last power rankings of 2021, and we did have Limerick above Tip. So we did have Limerick above Tip, and that's how we have stuck with things this year. So just looking back on why that happened, I guess last year, you're looking back through the last couple of years, and Tipperary did beat Limerick in Championship by a point 2 seasons ago, and then last year in the Championship it was an 11-point defeat to Kerry in their only game. But then on top of that, Tipperary got relegated themselves, and Cavan obviously getting dragged down into Division 4. It's probably one of the most sensational National League stories we had last year. Limerick just looked that little bit better. They beat Tipperary, for example, in the National League last year. They didn't play each other in the Championship, and that is why they've edged themselves a little bit forward. Like they had a good win, a 10-point win against Wicklow in the league last year. They had a narrow defeat to Offaly. Limerick had a good season last year. Tipperary had a very, very bad season, and that's reflected in Limerick being ahead of Tip. Cavan in at 18, as I mentioned. Down in at number 17. They got hockeyed by Donegal in the Ulster Championship last year in their only game. They were playing their football in Division 2 but managed to stay in the division after beating Laois on the last day of the season. In at number 16 is Offaly. So this is into the next page here, but still,
I think that like Offaly, Westmeath, Clare all should be behind Cavan and Down. I would give super extra bonus points for being in the Ulster Championship, where it's impossible to tell how good you are because you're going up against the best teams in the country.
Like I absolutely take that, but the point, so the real question here would be around Cavan versus Offaly, for example. I do think Down managing to stay in the division and staying in Division 2
Down should be ahead of all those.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that. Cavan, I think, at 18 are there because of the terrible league that they had last year, and then I guess there's no forgiveness in the Ulster Championship for them to try and turn that around, because they drew Tyrone and they got beaten by 8 points by Tyrone, and there was no way they could right the wrongs of what happened to them in the league. But what else are you going to do? Like, are we just supposed to pretend that everything was fine and them getting relegated to Division 4?
Well, we could run the simulation of what a proper championship would look like in our heads and go,
yeah,
if Cavan had 3 home games and 4 away games, or 4 home games and 3 away games, I think that they would finish towards the top of Division 3 at the moment.
I know,
but they would be ahead of Clare, and that they would be ahead of Offaly, and that they would be ahead of Westmeath.
Well, let's see. But we can only judge what
are Westmeath on that page?
Westmeath are on are number 15. Yeah.
No. Did what? No.
Yeah. I mean, like I think so. I think Westmeath has they were the ones who dished out that massive Laois hammering. Like, okay, so here's
okay, fair enough. Sorry.
So I am investing a lot in what happened in the Championship last year, but just to kind of go back to what happened with Cavan last year, we can't just necessarily box off the league as this sort of. Sorry, go on. You make your point.
Well, Wexford at the weekend. I mean,
I had not factored in pre-season competitions into this.
The O'Byrne Cup.
No.
Wexford scored 6 goals past. Anyway,
we can't just look at what happened in the league last year and just box it off as something totally insignificant if your case is to push Cavan up above 18th. Like, the last game that they played in the league last year to get relegated was against Wicklow, and they got beaten by Wicklow. So it's very hard to make a case that in a significant game when you're up against Wicklow and you get beaten, that you should be any higher than number 18. So that's why they're down where they are. Down ahead of them, Offaly ahead of them. Like, my hunch this year is that Offaly are one of the teams that do make a bit of progression, and they will move above Westmeath. Now, Westmeath did have a bad league themselves last year, but they were playing Division 2. They were playing at a higher level than some of the other counties they're contending against this year, and they have been given a boost. I won't lie, they have been given a boost in these rankings because of that win against Laois, a 16-point win against a team that I thought at the time was of a similar standard. Didn't prove to be the case. So, I don't know. I mean, I can see where you're coming from on the Westmeath point on their ranking being a little bit inflated, but they are where they are. They're in at number 15. And then the last county I would say in this middle tier is Clare. at number 14. Clare obviously, like, they were in the picture to get promoted last year. They unfortunately got not drawn against Mayo. They got Mayo in their promotion head to head in Division 2, so they won't be playing Division 1 football. And then their only game in the Championship was against Kerry. The next tier, I would say, is the sort of the outsiders, where
Cork are clinging to that tier.
With
their bare fingernails.
With their bare fingernails. Yeah, I'm not going to...
You're kind of grandfathering them in to try and hype up a bit of Munster Football Championship so that you could do a bit of Yera in advance of the routine 12 to 15 point victory that Kerry have over Cork whenever they play them this year.
New manager, new players, a lot of underage success over the last few years. There's a reason to think that Cork will get back to at least a pretenders status over the next little while. Cork have been as high as 9 or 10 over the last few years in these rankings, so they have slipped back to 13, getting beaten by Kerry by 22 points. A lot of people, I will accept, should say that they should be down further than that. But I do think that Kerry were the form team in the country at that point and were beating up teams for fun. That was not long after they hammered Tyrone in the National League, for example. Their league was okay last year. I mean, they were in a relegation playoff, but they did beat Westmeath for that. They're still in Division 2. I'd give them a chance of getting promoted this year.
And they have Kerry straight up, isn't that it, this year in the Munster football?
Yeah, but at least there's a backdoor this year.
Yeah.
But also, that game's been played in Cork this year. So
is it?
Yeah, well, it was Clarny last year.
You always have trouble beating them by 15 points there. They score 2 early goals and then you score 6, and it's like...
Yeah, well, we will see. We will see how things go for them. Like, I know I've been calling this for a long time, for about 4 or 5 years at this point, but the Cork bounce is coming at some point.
No.
It will.
A dead cat's bounce.
It is a fact that it is going to happen at some point.
Is it?
It is too populous a county. They've had too much success at underage level.
In fairness, they have got their house in order. I'm wary of you speaking with your forked tongue about what's going to happen with Cork football.
Well,
been banging on for like the boy who cried wolf. At this point, it's like
they're in at number 13.
When the wolf is eating me, come back and tell me about it.
It's not. They're not even in the top 12 teams.
You said they're top tier though.
Let's not get. No, sorry, they're in the. What have I called them? The outsiders. These 5 counties that I've got are the outsiders. So
les étrangers.
Yeah, exactly. The other outsider next in the section is Roscommon in at number 12. I've put Derry in ahead of them at number 11. Derry were sensational last year. I think that this is a team that is poised to go into the top 10 this season. Like, talk about a county that have been brutalised by the fact that they exist in Ulster. 2 years without a backdoor. They got Armagh in 2020, Donegal in 2021. They lost those games by a combined total of 3 points. Oof. They're just in both of those games just a level below those two teams who were obviously top tier teams. The league last year, they were sensational. Like the 19 point win against Fermanagh, the 16 point win against Longford, beating Offaly by 12 points in the league final last year was a seriously impressive performance from this Derry team, and they'll feel that they could have beaten Donegal on the day as well. So 11 may actually look to be not generous at all to Derry once we look back at this at the end of the season. A team that could definitely get into the top 10. The top 10 then, but still in the same tier, I would say, is Meath and Kildare, 10 and 9 respectively, and that is the end of the outsiders tier. I've got Kildare just ahead of Meath. I guess they beat Meath in the really pivotal game that they had last year, beating by 3 points in that promotion playoff, and Kildare are the team playing Division 1 football. Early signs from the new coaching ticket is that things are going to go well as well.
Well, look, it's exciting times. I think I'd probably have Derry ahead of the Meath and Kildare at the moment, just on the basis that they are Ulster football. The things they're a bit further down the line. It's year 3 of the management team, and it's, so I would have higher expectations of them in a championship game. And if they met on a neutral field, I would make Derry favourites at the moment.
I'm not sure, and I don't think I'd go that far. I think, especially with Kildare, you've got a Division 1 team here in Kildare, and you've got a team who were playing Division 3 last year in Derry. Granted, way too good for Division 3, and they'll be pushing into the upper reaches of Division 2.
But the league in the last couple of years was so short and abortive that it's hard to say that this is a traditional Division 1 team, Division 2 team, Division 3 team, Division 4 team at the moment, just because there was so short league campaigns.
Yeah.
So I just think that you can throw a blanket over those teams largely. From if Cork and Kildare played 5 times on a neutral field, I would expect Kildare to come out as series winners. I don't think they'd win every game.
No. But
you wouldn't be terribly surprised if Cork won at least 2 of those games and it went down to a 5th game decider. And I think that's fairly similar with most of those. That's why I was saying I think if Down played Offaly 5 games, Down are going to beat Offaly 4 of those games. And that's why they should be ahead of them.
I'm not sure they would. It'd be a hell of a series though.
Wouldn't series like that be amazing?
Yeah, like I mean, anybody in these kind of similar tiers, you would watch them regardless of what tier they're on, as long as they're in the same tier. And in fairness, I think a lot of these outsiders would have a hell of a chance against against some of the pretenders, which is what I'm calling this. So the numbers 8 to 5 here are the pretenders this year, and I think every single one of these counties are looking at what Tyrone did last year and think to themselves, why not us?
How far down did you have Tyrone last year? What was the lowest they reached? Do you remember?
I don't remember. They might have gone down to 5 or 6 after the Killarney debacle, but I'm not sure.
Pre-season, do you remember where they were?
No. Do you have the answer?
I don't.
No?
We should look this up.
Yeah. Let's not do that. At number 8 is Galway. Number 7 is Armagh. Number 6 is Monaghan. And number 5 is Donegal. So those are the counties that I would refer to as the pretenders. I think every single one of those counties, maybe with the exception of Galway, maybe somewhat controversially, will have serious regrets about how last year went. I think Mayo were significantly better than Galway that day in Croke Park, and if a bounce of a ball had gone differently, I don't think Galway would have got through. But Armagh against Monaghan in that 2-point defeat, Monaghan obviously against Tyrone in that Ulster final, and Donegal in that defeat to Tyrone as well, Michael Murphy missing that penalty and getting sent off. Those are 3 counties with serious regrets with how 2021 went, and will have serious ambitions to do at Tyrone over the next couple of years. The top 4 then.
Can I just ask about Galway?
Yeah.
Are Galway frauds? Are they a fraudulent team in this top 8?
Possibly. I don't know. I think that what we need is a full normal season of choice at the wheel and getting back to where they were in the early stages of 2020. Now, it's probably presumptuous to think that that'll automatically happen. Maybe 2020 was just this strange bounce that a manager had, and maybe it was relatively fluky, but I think that the quality they have, particularly in the forwards, would suggest that there was a sustainable level that they hit early that year. I think it was Tyrone that they absolutely destroyed right before the pandemic began.
Was it not Mayo? Was it not like a massive turnaround? Maybe it was Tyrone. I thought they
in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have it to hand, but I think that there was some result against Tyrone in 2020 where they looked seriously good. Shane Walsh was just incredible that day. And I mean, the questions around Galway will be not so much the fraudulent nature of them. I think that's probably a tad too harsh, but maybe what happens when they do get into the really tough battles.
Super flaky.
I think they've been a little bit flaky for sure over the last little while. They haven't lived up to the reputation that a lot of these players have, and
less than the sum of their parts.
Yes, I think so. I absolutely think that, and I mean the performance against Mayo last year was such a letdown.
Here's a 5-game series for you on a neutral field in Athlone, maybe not Athlone, but a bit too close to Galway. Say Clonus, Derry versus Galway, 5-game series.
I think Galway win that.
Do they?
Yeah. I think. I don't know, but
it's pretty close. It's going to game 5.
Of a 7-game series?
A 5-game
series? Yeah, probably is. Yeah, maybe not. I think Galway could get it done maybe in 4. There is still a good. Derry have been excellent. There's no getting it wrong, but I
don't know. I think Galway will end this year not in the top 10, and Derry will be in the top 10.
Right. So I'm not sure. I think that
they have the ease of the Connacht. Sure, we'll roll you into we'll gently push you into the championship. We'll give you a few months to.
But they've got to play 2 Division 1 teams or 2 Division 1 near Division 1 standard teams in some years. I would say that their path is harder than Kerry's path and Dublin's path. It's the second strongest province really in terms of the opposition that they have to face.
If they respected Roscommon, it would be.
Well, I mean, you got to respect Roscommon. I mean, Roscommon have been better than me than Kildare and Cork.
I'm not saying I don't respect them, but Galway don't. That's the thing.
Yeah, well, I mean,
look, fair enough. Okay,
I respected them enough to beat them by 5 points last year, and I think I think maybe you're underappreciating the base level of this Galway team. That even when they're not good,
I think that they are the great underachievers of Gaelic football for the last 2 decades.
Yeah,
and that putting them in number 8 is based on the muscle memory of Pádraig Joyce as a footballer and Michael Donlan as a footballer and Kevin Walsh as a footballer, as opposed to what they've actually done on the field of play year in, year out over the last few years. There's a few moments where everybody has been fit and they've played well in games, but at the end of those games they've lost.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've been up big in those games and they've lost big in those games.
Like we're going to have to do a big preview of Galway versus Derry this year in the National League. I mean, like there is huge pressure on Galway to get straight back up to Division 1 this year. Like I do buy your point that last year's league was weird. Teams got relegated maybe a little bit unfairly, but like there is like ruthlessness to Division 1 that Galway have, I guess, fell victim to last year, and that doesn't bode well necessarily if you're questioning the stomach they have over the next little while.
Okay, we've gone on way too long here. So
yeah,
we're
top
out of time.
four. Number
Quick,
4 Mayo,
yeah.
number 3 Kerry, number 2 Dublin, number 1 Tyrone.
Okay, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to the top 4. I apologise for getting stuck into that, but we had to. OTB AM brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. We're talking Manchester United next.
I absolutely adore them lads. I have unbelievable time for them, but they're a great bunch, but it's not acceptable.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Off the ball's the best. Number 1.
It's the GOAT of sports apps.
Talk about the greatest of all time. Nathan, you know Big Joe. Big Joe's the greatest of all time. He's the GOAT. We know it. Every single time. Yes.
It's tough going. It's tough for my ego. I'm going to say I'm the Djokovic of this scenario.
I love it.
This is OTB Sports Radio. Download the OTB Sports app now.
With prices from only €289 for fully comprehensive car insurance, everyone's making the jump to getsetgo.ie. New business policies only. Prices subject to minimum premiums. T's and C's apply. MCL Insurance Services Limited Trading is getsetgo.ie is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
You're welcome back. It is 16 minutes past 8 on this Tuesday morning. You're with us here on OTB AM, brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. It is time to turn our attention back to the FA Cup last night. Manchester United 1-0 winners against Aston Villa. Delighted to welcome Samuel Luckhurst back to the show. He's the chief Manchester United writer with the Manchester Evening News. Good morning to you, Samuel.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Cheers for being with us. It was interesting listening to Ralph Rangnick in the aftermath of the game last night. He said that the introduction of Van de Beek, the move to a diamond, really helped his team see out the game and was a positive development. My sense in that is that if he truly believes that, he will start with the diamond on Saturday night. What's your take on that?
It's an interesting discussion to be had, given that he did change formation last night. That 4-2-2-2 formation seemed to have run its course with the shambolic defeat to Wolves. And for what was a tight contest against Villa, and of course it only ended 1-0, and Villa were arguably the better side over the 90 minutes. United saw it out relatively comfortably by making that formation change. They had a deeper bench to draw from as well. Jesse Lingard and Nancy Langer came on late on, and that energy up front seemed to take the game even further away from Villa. Villa, unfortunately for them, their bench, the players on it were probably unrecognisable to anyone but Aston Villa supporters. And so it's obviously a fillip for Van de Beek that Rangnick's come out and said that United gained control with him on the pitch. But on the flip side, he really should be starting that kind of game. It's an FA Cup game. He was a cup specialist under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. United have made a very, very big song and dance about wanting to keep players to have a big squad in this time of the pandemic, where outbreaks can happen in the first team. Yet when push comes to shove, it's pretty clear that the manager only trusts about 15, 16 players at the very maximum. And there have been ample opportunities to start Van de Beek. So although they might again change formation on Saturday, I wouldn't necessarily expect Van de Beek to be in the first 11.
What is the common thread between what Solskjaer is seeing and what Rangnick is seeing when it comes to Van de Beek? Because I think maybe before Rangnick came in, there was this sort of almost meme out there that Solskjaer just had no time for Van de Beek. It wasn't a Solskjaer signing. But I think the last couple of weeks have shown that it wasn't just Solskjaer who had a bit of an issue with him.
Yes, there are contrasting takes in people who you speak to who've witnessed Van de Beek at Carrington. Some of the players believe he's a really good trainer and were completely dumbfounded that he didn't get more opportunities under Solskjaer. Others say that he doesn't take instructions on board. That was something that came out from the Dutch camp during the Euros. The feeling there was that they weren't too bothered when he got injured and wasn't able to play at the Euros, because apparently there was this issue in terms of him taking instructions on board, and by that time his I mean, he'd had a season to forget United anyway, so he wasn't in the best frame of mind. But you'd still think he'd be a loss to the Dutch squad, and Louis van Gaal has just completely cut him loose from that so far. But even the Europa League final, for those of us who were privileged to be there, we were able to watch the training session in full the night before, and he really looked sharp. He was playing deep. I know you can, those kind of sessions can be quite misleading, but there were certainly merits to him. And then, of course, when the final came around the following evening, he didn't get a kick whatsoever. And this season, on the very few occasions that he has started, he's done okay. He's done more than enough, given the standard of United's midfield department, to be playing more minutes. And the irony of it was that he almost kept Solskjaer in the job when he came on at half-time against Watford and was excellent during his 45 minutes. He scored a goal, he created chances, and he thought that might be the breakthrough moment for him, particularly as Solskjaer then got sacked the next day. But it's just not happened. And I suspect that there are still issues with his physicality or lack of it. But I think that's becoming an easy excuse to hide behind, given that when he came on against Watford, he sent one of the players off to the physio's room. He was that aggressive with his challenging. So
you don't expect him to start at the weekend, but in terms of the 4-2-2-2, do we expect them to start with a diamond against Villa at the weekend? Has the in-game management, do you think, that we saw last night from Rangnick suggested that there is a change coming imminently in that tactical formation?
I think it may be a bit rash to have that knee-jerk reaction, given that was an in-game change, and in the context of it was clearly a good idea. It worked, but I think there are an awful lot of factors at play for the game on Saturday that really lend in their favour to Villa, and that I thought Villa played very well against United. A lot of teams are playing well at Old Trafford this season. You've got the Coutinho factor. Steven Gerrard will have been stewing over that defeat last night and the relentless stick he got from United supporters. Villa hadn't won at home against United in 26 and a half years. It's a 5:30 kickoff. Villa Park can be a very, very atmospheric stadium when the floodlights are on. And Villa have played well quite a few times now under Gerrard without really getting the results, and they're probably thinking they're due one. So there are a lot of things at play for United to consider. That they should have some players back as well. You'd expect Ronaldo, Sancho. Rangnick said last night that he thought Maguire would come back as well. So they would obviously have a big bearing on what the formation would be. I would be surprised if Cavani starts again, given that Cavani has pretty much declared himself only available to start one game per week. That's a thread running back to last season under Solskjaer. So you'd think Ronaldo would come back in. That would indicate maybe going with one up front. And the choice, I mean, Rangnick's not short of choices to partner Ronaldo, but unfortunately for him, those choices are not particularly in prolific form at the moment.
Well, let's talk about one of them. Marcus Rashford. Is the patience of the Old Trafford crowd wearing thin with Rashford at the moment? It seemed that way watching on TV last night.
Yes, undeniably. When it happened in each half, there were audibly exasperated groans at him, not going for a loose ball in the penalty area. Some sarcastically cheered when he was substituted. That was countered by some fans serenading him. But the truth of the matter is, 2021 was his annus horribilis. He very, very rarely played well. It's very difficult to think of a moment where he did something genuinely outstanding. He conceded after the Euros that he went into that low on confidence. The Europa League final last year was the nadir of his career. He was that bad. And watching him that night, you did feel a bit of sympathy for him, because he was run into the ground by Solskjaer last year. He was overplayed while he was carrying that shoulder injury that required surgery in the summer. And there was a moment in the Europa League final where he was very much on his knees, literally, and Solskjaer was checking on him, and he still kept him on. And even the stadium announcer that evening said that Rashford had come off for one of the substitutions, but it was actually Paul Pogba. Even the stadium announcer thought that this was too much, that he had to come off at some stage. So he's been in a rut, and it's been a rut for a very long time. And you'd even hesitate to say that he's regressed, because he's not gone back to a low from previously in his career. This is the worst period in his career by far. He was never this bad under Louis van Gaal. He was never this bad under Jose Mourinho either. and it's just been allowed to fester. And unfortunately, he can't. You look at Fernandes; he was benched last week. I think he has been minorly jolted. He had an impact of sorts against Wolves in terms of fashioning chances and almost scoring at 0-0 and then 1-0 down, and looked a little bit better last night. But Rashford at the moment, it's very difficult to see how he gets out of that rut, because it's been going on for so long, and even benching him isn't having the desired effect.
So what's the future for Rashford at Manchester United?
That's a good question. I think that some supporters would say it has to be questioned. He is technically out of contract next year, but there's the +1 option on top of it. So it's effectively there are 2.5 years left on his contract. But there is more competition there now. And certain players, sometimes they might think a change of scenery would be beneficial to their career. Beyond United, he's lost his place in the England team very much at the start of last season. He was a regular in that England front three with Kane and Sterling. Come the Euros, nobody could just justify a starting role for him. And of course, unfortunately for him, the Euros ended the way it did, with him missing the penalty kick. I don't really envisage a scenario where he leaves United imminently. I think that there will come a point where his form does pick up. Whether his form reaches the heights it did in the first half of Solskjaer's first full season, where he was genuinely talismanic and he scored important goals, and his big game record in his career is excellent. There was 1 week in Solskjaer's first full season where he scored against Tottenham in midweek, and then he scored at City at the weekend. And when he got injured that January, it was an absolute disaster for United, because he was talismanic up until that point. Since he's returned from that injury, when it was the restart, he was still a very important player, but Fernandes had come into the team by that stage and had signed for the club, and he'd very much assumed that talismanic responsibility. And Rashford has just very, very gradually been on a downward spiral. But even last season, he started it pretty well with a hat-trick against Leipzig, winner against PSG. His form wasn't a problem up until, again, the halfway stage. As soon as we entered 2021, just something changed, and there's the mitigation of the injuries. But he's been fully fit for a few months now, pretty much. And initially, he did look good when he returned from shoulder surgery. He scored a few goals, but he's not scored since October 30th. I think he scored 10 club goals in the calendar year of 2021. So I know he's obviously had a hell of a lot of good press for what he's done off the pitch, and rightly so. But on the pitch, that has cut him some slack. But when the supporters start turning on you, which was the case on Monday night, there's no hiding place.
I think everybody wants Marcus Rashford to come back to the level that he was at. And I wonder, is there quite often with Manchester United at the moment in particular, just a sense of sentimentality about some of these decisions, that they can't be ruthless enough to make a decision about this? Now, granted, he may come back and come the end of the season, there may not be a question about this, but if this malaise continues, would a club more ruthless than Manchester United perhaps be making a real decision about selling Marcus Rashford this summer? Because it kind of feels that maybe over the last couple of years they've sat in their hands with regards to Paul Pogba quite a bit. And I wonder, is that actually a trend at the football club now, that if Marcus Rashford is poor and is bad for the rest of the season, that actually they're like, it's fine, we don't need to get rid of him?
It's a good point in that United now feel as though they're in a position where they can sell players, which sounds strange because their record in the sellers market is pretty dreadful, dating back even to Ferguson's days when they sold Daniel James last year for 25 million to Leeds. I think he was the joint 4th record sale in the club's history, and that was alongside David Beckham going to Real Madrid in 2003. And even then, Madrid thought that was blind robbery. They couldn't quite believe their luck that they've got this world superstar, this marketable player for only £25 million. I think Rashford's still a long, long way down the pecking order in terms of players who United would regard as sellable. There are a lot of players who are going to go this year simply because they're running down their contracts. Lingard, Pogba, Cavani, Juan Mata's another one. So that's quite a big presence in the attacking department who aren't going to be there next season. Anthony Marshall doesn't want to be there, and there's been an irrelevance for 16 months. He's been even worse than Rashford over a longer period of time. And if he does go out on loan this month, United really need to strike while the iron's hot in the summer and sell him, which was the mistake they made with Lingard last year. There was just too much indecision and too much sentimentalism from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer about Lingard. There was all this, he's been at United since the age of 7, 3/4 of his life. Do we really want to sell him? He's very popular at the club. So, of course, it will be a wrench when that day comes that he leaves. But unfortunately for United, when he does leave, they're not going to get a penny for him. When last summer, they should easily have banked 20 million, 25 million pounds for him. And if they were proactive in their way of going about it, they would have sold him. They feel as though they're in a position to do that this year. But really, they should have been doing that not just last year, not just the year before that, but throughout the whole of Ed Woodward's time. But I think they feel a bit burnt from the Louis van Gaal era there, and that they did cut their losses on a lot of players for quite frugal sums and didn't feel as though they should have banked. But they feel as though they could have banked more for those sales, and they didn't. And you could pretty much count on 2 hands the amount of players they've sold during Woodward's time over the last 8.5 years, where you've thought they've got very good fees for them.
That's really interesting, because that speaks to a club that's being well run, that has a long-term vision, that decides this player is going to play a certain number of minutes for us this year and therefore it's worth keeping him. This player is not going to play that many minutes for us, and so therefore we should cash in. That's an asset that we can recoup and then invest in either young players coming through and give those minutes to them, or spend on a superstar who's going to have an impact on the team. And you see that at the best run clubs in England, whereas at the moment it looks like there has been a sclerotic approach to the transfer market in particular. Rangnick was supposed to have some kind of role in that, or certainly it seemed in the arrival press that was happening, was like, well, he's going to inject knowledge of how to run a long-term project into the club. So this transfer window is going to be very interesting to see who he identifies quickly as players that are worth cashing in on.
And the strange thing is they'll probably cash in on none of them unless they get a loan fee for Anthony Martial. There have been a number of players who've told Rangnick that they want to leave because they're not playing enough. Dean Henderson's another one who approached Rangnick a couple of weeks ago and emphasised to him that he needed to leave. He's only started 2 games this season. He's 24. He needs regular playing time. But Rangnick wants 3 first-team ready goalkeepers and has told Henderson then that he couldn't go. Henderson's, my understanding, is still agitating because he's very adamant that he has to go, he has to get a loan. Ajax have been touted as a possible club to take him on loan. That interest came about in November. Now, from Henderson's perspective, that's the perfect loan because you're going to a different country, a club that are playing in the Champions League. You get Champions League knockout football, and also you would be playing under Erik ten Hag, who may or may not become the United coach in the summer, which would obviously put Henderson in a very advantageous position to become the United #1 next season, which is still ultimately his end goal. But when he did sign that last contract, it was it's about 110 grand a week he's on, £2 million signing on fee. When that kind of money is offered to you and you're a 22, 23-year-old, even just the prospect of duking it out with David De Gea, it's so good. You can't really refuse it, but there's an element now that he is regretting that contract because his career hasn't kicked on. And there's the mitigation there of him getting COVID in the summer. He had been told that he was going to start the season as #1. He was laid low by COVID for a month, so he couldn't start the season. De Gea started, and that also scuppered any possibility of Henderson getting a loan transfer as well. So although there are a lot of players at United that want out, the majority of them, or certainly a sizable portion of them, are out of contract at the end of the season, and there's just been next to no chance of them being sold this summer because it just doesn't suit them. And those players who could be sold, who would fetch a fee, this is not the advantageous time to sell them because it's too rushed. Eric Bailly, for example, is playing in AFCON. Marshall, it's obviously a loan deal that would get done there. If Henderson goes, that would have to be a loan deal as well. So although January, you go ahead of it, you always think, well, this could be a busy month. The feeling all along has been that the dealings that United do will be pretty low level.
Is Harry Maguire's captaincy up for debate at the moment?
It is among the supporters. I think if you were to do a poll of, say, season ticket holders, should Maguire be captain? I would imagine the majority would say no. Rangnick has said he should be available for the Villa game on Saturday. If Ronaldo's available as well, then that's something to keep your eyes peeled for, because Ronaldo captained United against Wolves last week. But I think what Roy Keane said on Sunday and has said about Harry Maguire in the past really echoes what a lot of United supporters think of him, in that he was prematurely promoted to captain. I think that was Ole Gunnar Solskjaer trying to establish his authority, because Maguire was his signing. United spent £80 million on him, but it did seem very premature, and it's not really been vindicated either, whether it be through his form or his leadership. Maguire, like a lot of United players, seems to have been rumbled this season with the return of crowds, which of course amplifies pressure. It's a different kind of experience from just finishing second and finishing above Liverpool last season and getting to a European final. It's a completely dynamic this season, and a lot of United players have been found out, and there's always been some scepticism from a lot of United supporters about the fee that was paid for Maguire. When Liverpool signed Virgil van Dijk, it had a transformative impact on them. They won the European Cup, they won the Premier League. When City signed Ruben Diaz, it had a transformative effect there, and they won the Premier League last season. He was the PFA Player of the Year. Unfortunately for United, and rather than keeping with the running of the club, Maguire costs more than both of those players, considerably more in Diaz's case. And unfortunately, that outlay has not been justified. United's defence actually regressed last season. It's been even worse this season after Maguire initially had a good impact in his first season there. But ultimately, he reserves his best form for England, which is always going to be a bugbear with United's matchgoers, given that there aren't many there who actively support England. And also, I don't think you can underestimate the Yorkshire heritage for the Greater Manchester contingent. For some of those United fans, that will rankle with them that Maguire is captain of the club.
Right, that's an interesting little subplot that I hadn't realised. There was one delicious bit of a tidbit of gossip that I'm almost loath to bring up, but Axel Tuanzebe's brother is also his agent, and he has suggested that Tuanzebe's loan period at Villa was doomed when Steven Gerrard arrived. Not because Steven Gerrard doesn't like him as a player, but because of the rivalry between Manchester United and Liverpool. Is there anything, is there even a morsel, a scintilla of truth in this, do you think, Samuel?
Well, Dimitri Tuanzebe, Axel Tuanzebe's brother, gave those quotes on the record, which is rare that an agent does that. It seemed a very naive thing to do, to burn your bridges with a pretty influential figure in the game who could become the Liverpool manager. If you say that about a personality like Gerrard, then maybe other managers will think twice about taking on your client as a player, whether it's signing them permanently or on loan. Ultimately, Tuanzebe had lost his place in that Villa side before Gerrard was sacked. He was on the bench under Dean Smith in his final games. I think Villa, you see what their fans say about Tuanzebe. He was very much regarded as the fourth choice centre-back after a couple of bad performances earlier this season. And I suppose from Tuanzebe's brother's perspective, he's set up his own agency. It's good for him to get exposure. And this was one way of going about it, but it was a pretty naive way of going about it.
Yeah, I can't imagine Steven Gerrard's going to forget it either at any point. he's not. It doesn't strike me somebody who forgives and forgets, our Stevie G. Samuel, good stuff. One last question: do you expect any incomings from Manchester United's perspective over the next 3 weeks?
No, I wouldn't. That is a very bloated squad as it is, and it probably needs to go on a crash diet sooner or later. But that diet's probably going to happen later. And once the decks are cleared in the summer with players who've run down their contracts and gone because those deals have expired, and then they can get about selling players who are deemed surplus, and there are going to be more buyers for them in the summer. It's a good position for the next coach to inherit, in that it's a more streamlined squad, and he's got the leverage to go out there and say, I need this player, that player to strengthen the team. So I always suspected this window would be quite quiet for United, and so far that's been the case.
Samuel, good stuff. Great to have you with us again. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's Samuel Luckhurst there for the Manchester Evening News. It is 8:39. John Duggan is with us. John, Happy New Year to you. It's too late. Kenny Cunningham will be smacking me around the place at the moment. It's too late to be saying Happy New Year.
Well, Ger and Owen, good morning and Happy New Year to you both. I don't think it's too late, because if you see somebody for the first time, that's my rule. First time, doesn't matter if it's the 20th of January, the 20th of March. First time, Happy New Year.
I agree. Kenny Cunningham's having none of it.
He's probably switching off now. He's switched off his digital
It's
channel.
a minute past midnight on New Year's Day. You can't be saying that.
I was very, very happy I was out last week because there's definitely, it gets to an awkward stage the longer the days go on. So coming in on the 10th of January was a happy start because you can just get away with not saying Happy New Year to anybody.
Well, you're just a rude prick.
Yeah.
That's not very nice.
No, I know, but like, I mean, there's a sort of, you're kind of compelled.
You're supposed to say Happy New Year.
You're kind of compelled.
Well, the
to
first
say
thing
it,
I did
like,
this morning, I just walked in and said, "Oh, and Happy New Year," and he had to say it to me.
He said it back. I thought you were going to say blanked you.
Under duress.
He wouldn't blank me. He wouldn't do that to me.
Yeah, well, like I just think there's like an undue pressure on people if it's the 8th of January to continue to say Happy New Year. That's all I'm saying. And if you've got the kindness in your heart to start the Happy New Year's, then I will reciprocate.
John, what's going on?
Well, we saw United win last night 1-0 against Aston Villa. The only thing I thought when I watched it was, well, what's happened to Rashford? And also the players have been listening to Kieran McKenna and Michael Carrick and Ole, and now they're listening to Ralph Rangnick and Chris Armas, and they're thinking to themselves, these guys are gone in the summer. We just have to get to May. So it's just complete limbo. They're just in suspended animation, Manchester United. And Villa were decent, and Villa, I think, will win at the weekend.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think they will. I think Villa are going places.
They look good. It's just that there's been a lot of nice teams over the years, right? There's been a lot of teams who play nice football and then don't score goals, and they find themselves stuck in a relegation scrap. Like, the strikers need to start scoring.
Well, Coutinho is absolutely fascinating. What are we going to see from Coutinho? Somebody who can recapture his form, or another James Rodriguez? That's going to be a really interesting development at Villa, who are not short of cash.
James had those first 5 weeks where he looked great.
Yeah.
And then
disappeared.
Yeah.
So tonight, Southampton against Brentford, 7:45. Africa Cup of Nations matches today. Mo Salah for Egypt against Nigeria in Group D. He'll feature. The other match in that group involving Sudan and Guinea-Bissau. In Group E, Algeria taking on Sierra Leone. Alex Hawke is the Australian Immigration Minister, so he's still to decide whether to take any further action against Novak Djokovic. As things stand, Djokovic will be playing in the Australian Open, but Hawke retains the power under the Migration Act to cancel his visa and deport him from Australia. So this is a political hot potato, and it's going to be popcorn one way or the other. So he is unvaccinated, as we know. All-Ireland champions Tyrone meeting Cavan in the Dr. McKenna Cup at Kingspan Breffni Park this evening. Down playing Antrim and Uri, both matches starting at 8:15. A 7 o'clock start at Porky Rin for Cork and Waterford in the McGrath Cup. Ronnie Sullivan in action at the Masters snooker in London today against Jack Lazowski, and Mark Selby up against Steve Maguire later on, lads.
Okay, you did your predictions for football on Saturday. What other big predictions have you got for the world?
Kerry will win the All-Ireland football, I think.
No reaction from Owen. He's been taught, don't say nothing.
Well,
don't show any signs of weakness or hope.
What's giving you that impression, John?
If they can get their defence sorted, I think Jack O'Connor is a very good manager, and we've seen twice before that he's gone in the first year and won All Irelands. I think his appointment is very significant. The best player in the country in David Clifford, and I do think that the rest of it, I think it was a season in 2021 that wasn't a vintage season, because I think Dublin and Kerry underperformed. And not to in any way take away what Tyrone did, but I still think Dublin are in a transitional period, as they said in Pulp Fiction. And with McCaffrey, Cluxton, Mannion gone, I can see Kerry winning that All-Ireland this year in football.
Do you subscribe to the sting in the tail theory, John? Because I was making this point before.
Owen's sting in the tail theory, as it's known in this part. These thing. I thought everybody would just be familiar with these sting in the tail theory. The Cian sting in the tail theory.
After 82, Kerry come back and have a period of success. Kilkenny, after 2010, come back and have a period of success. Do you see the same thing happening with Dublin, basically, rather than the whole transition conversation? That the here and the now, the remaining parts from the 6 in a row are still very much strong and alive and able of winning not just one but maybe 2 All-Irelands.
No, I don't really see that comparison. I think Kerry, say 84 to 86, had pretty much the same group of players that Dublin don't have now, because most of Dublin's stars have retired. I think it was such a monumental effort for Dublin to win that 5 in a row. I think the 6 in a row was the softest All-Ireland they could have ever won. They beat Cavan in the semi-final, and Mayo didn't fire in the final. I still think Kerry in 19 really pushed Dublin, and if Kerry can recapture that form from 19 into 2022, I think they'll win the All-Ireland, and I think Jack O'Connor's the man to lead them to that. I do think management is important. I think Jack is the best manager out there. of the top teams. Obviously, Brian Dooher and Fergal Logan, you can't say anything about them either. Hurling wise, I think I'm going to go for Limerick. I think that's everybody's probably choice. If you're getting 12 All-Stars and scoring 318 in an All-Ireland final,
it's not bad.
Like the only team that can beat Limerick this year are Limerick.
Just if we do think back to the start, was it the league last year, or the league the previous year, where they were getting in fights and they were getting in scraps, and they were
New York trip and everything.
There was. I mean, on the pitch, there was like a proper sense of them just being a bit narky. They got over that. They managed to smooth all that out last year, and like the first half against Tipperary last year, everybody's forgotten about it.
Yeah.
They got absolutely annihilated because the second half was one of the greatest 35 minutes that we've ever seen. But Galan should have been sent off. Like, if Galan gets sent off against Tip and there's no back door, what happens?
I think Limerick edges.
I don't know.
It's not as sensational as it would have been, as it was in the end, but they still win.
Yeah, I think that because they won the final absolutely annihilating Cork, I don't think they're as far ahead of the chasing pack as we think they are, and I'm really interested to see what the Galway bounce is. I'm really interested to see what happens with Tip, because Tip are right there too, and like maybe they don't have the pace. Look, I don't know enough about the next crop of young players coming through in Tip to see if they can match the pace and the physicality that Limerick have. But I think as well that we're going to see Limerick tested, because it's hopefully a proper normal championship this year.
Like what's interesting is when you mentioned the league, like, I mean, they failed to win 3 of their games last year in the league, and I think that's interesting. Like, the Tipperary managed to get a draw against them, and then they were beaten by Galway and Waterford. Now, obviously, when it comes to Waterford and Tip, Limerick have proven that league means absolutely nothing. But I wonder if some of the excitement around Galway this year, just a little 1 or 2% about it, is actually because of the fact that Galway did get one over Limerick last year in the National League, and they did it in a way that might be more, you could possibly replicate it more this year. Obviously, you throw the Shefflin factor in there, and it does seem to me that there is now a thought process that Galway are the only ones, other than Limerick themselves, John, who can actually stop Limerick this year. Because I do think the Cork thing, while it's coming in bulk codes, I think hurling-wise, that is still a year or two away from resulting in the main silverware.
Cork have an issue performing at Croke Park. Until that's overcome, you'd have to discount them. I do think Galway are the nearest team to Limerick, based on even that semi-final in 2020 was close. Now, Joe is obviously gone. Henry Shefflin, I think everything's, to me, would say that he's going to make it as a manager in inter-county hurling. Like, look what he did with Ballyhale, won 2 Club All-Irelands, and obviously we know his playing pedigree. He's got no Joe. But I'd say within the next 3 years, Galway might win the All-Ireland. But where are Limerick? If you compare Limerick to Kilkenny in the noughties, Limerick are probably at the 2008 level. Maybe they've got another year, and then maybe in 2 years' time. Maybe. That's what I'm thinking.
The year after the Waterford game,
it was the epic final against Tipperary,
it was
4 in a row.
Where the penalty that might not have been a penalty, that they needed to win the game, and obviously Shefflin sticks up, nervously beats one of the greatest goalkeepers of all time. So, there's plenty going into that. But
Limerick don't have the tradition that Kilkenny would have had of doing that. So Limerick are still in new territory.
Yeah, and it's going to be very interesting to see. I don't think it's
put on dried.
I think last year it felt like, let's just get this done. This year feels a bit more interesting and vibrant and different. That's my take on that one. Anything else?
Well, Champions League, I've already said on the show, Manchester City are certainties. The World Cup, I've gone for Brazil. I do think management is important, and I do think Chichi's a very good manager, and I think that Brazil have a lot of talent through the team if Neymar turns up. Like, it just what the South American teams are going to do. Argentina and Brazil are closely matched at the moment. They've really struggled with the European teams in the last few World Cups, but I think France and England are the other teams in my head for the World Cup. And Patrick Cantlay to win a major championship. I do think Rory will win a major this year.
Ooh!
Yeah, I do think he will. I think if it's a benign St Andrews, Rory has the ability to really take that course apart.
This is our annual January conversation where we're like, is McIlroy relevant? And then he does something and you're like, yeah, he's back.
Well, we can't get lulled into that false sense of security again. So I'm not going to be that person on the week of the Masters. Well, you play this back to me. That's saying that McIlroy will win the Masters. But I do think that I think something happened at the Ryder Cup with that emotion and the fact that he went back to Michael Bannon and he realised, you know what, the best way I need to play golf is to play with freedom and stop getting in my own way. Rory's biggest, I think, adversary sometimes can be himself in just overanalyzing just the artistry that he has. And then he won, and then he nearly won in Dubai. I'm very interested to see what we're going to see at the start of the season. The problem he has is that the field is so deep. Golf has never been as good.
No,
golf has never been as
is
good
the problem
with the talent.
Really interesting as well. The prize money for the women's US Open has gone to 10 million. It's doubled from 5 million. It's going to go to 12 million over the next couple of years. So, fingers crossed that we see an Irish winner on the.
France will win the Six Nations, by the way.
It's going to be a good Six Nations, assuming it all happens.
Give it 12 years that France haven't won the Six Nations in 12 years. They have to win it.
Hopefully France peaked this year, a year out, too early. They absolutely crush everybody in the Six Nations, and then they lull themselves into a false sense of security, and then they end up at some weird industrial estate outside Bordeaux as they're trying to keep the players isolated from all of their fans and family, and they screw it up, and we beat them and go straight through.
Can we plant Eddie O'Sullivan in as the new French Rugby Union logistics manager?
8:50 this morning, John. Good stuff. Thanks for that. Right, I want to play you this. It is Pat Nevin talking about Marcus Rashford. Have a look at this.
Rashford's just, you keep on saying it, you need everybody doing it. If you're going to do what Rangnick wants them to do, they all got to do it together. Now, to be fair, when one doesn't, such as Cavani, or in this thing, I expected a wee bit more from Cavani, but then he's no youngster, but B, he's just getting his full fitness back as well. But on top of that, there just doesn't seem to be the natural ability to do that. And it's not just him, it's all the way. It's Bruno, it's Rashford. There's not enough of them doing it. I mean, Fred would, and you certainly know McTominay would if he got half a chance. But you need everybody to do it. So it doesn't look right yet. And I think Rangnick, listening to him before the game, he was accepting that, they are too passive sometimes. And that's when if you watch Irish sport, right?
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
Or anything. Have you ever seen a player not giving everything? Come on, let's be honest about it. Everybody's giving everything. And you look at some of the football teams and you think, like Man United, you think, well, wait a minute. Anybody in any sport that cares goes for it and gives everything they've got for the vast majority of every game.
Yeah.
Pat Nevin speaking last night about Marcus Rashford, making a comparison with the great game of hurling. The Rashford situation is going to be interesting over the next little while. For anybody who's just with us now, we had Samuel Luckhurst of Manchester Evening News with us earlier on, and it is interesting that Manchester United kind of cling to this notion of what a player can be, or what he used to be, or what he means to a club. And I'm not saying
that was a great question.
That Rashford is yet at the Lingard situation or the Pogba situation, but there is. It possibly gets there.
Isn't the sentimentality, though, something that is important, that it is actually part of the fabric of Manchester United? When you consider their history, right? And when you consider that their greatest team of all time got wiped out in a plane crash, and that they changed the strip, they changed the colours of their strip to incorporate black after that. Like, sentimentality is a very important part of the identity, and you would hate to lose the sentimentality is bad. We all agree it's bad that they didn't sell Jesse Lingard because but like what if they just put Lingard in the team this year? Like, he's clearly good enough to be in that team at the moment. I'm very torn between it's a money making empire that Combine harvests up money all around the world. It just drives this giant truck all over the world and sucks up, hoovers money out of the pockets of people and puts it in the bank for the owners. But they do that because people really, really believe in what it stands for as an organisation. And that's a very strange, weird, anachronistic thing. And part of that is the fact that, they are sentimental. They do believe in sentimentality. And we all want a little bit of human comfort.
I agree to a point, but that also has to reach a point itself where you do have to cut losses. Now, it's interesting, if we're going to throw Lingard, Pogba and Rashford into the same conversation, is the common thread here not so much that these guys have shown glimpses of very good form in their career and have now fizzled out a little bit? Is it actually more to do with the fact that they've been youth team players for Manchester United, and that's just it, that Manchester United have that connection to players who have not been signed by the club. Granted, Manchester United had to re-sign Paul Pogba, but they sort of feel a connection with the making of Paul Pogba, with the making of Marcus Rashford, and with the making of Jesse Lingard.
Well, every single game has had a youth team player stretching back.
Of course,
but
that's the big thing.
That's the other thing that, like, and so if you back yourselves into these rules that we have, that aren't really rules at all. That's not a rule. You can field a team without a youth team player if you want. Then you're a victim of your own made up sentimentality, and you need to be able to surf the wave of leaning in on the tradition and the good parts of it, and then saying, well, this doesn't actually matter. If tonight the best team is not going to have a youth team player, it doesn't matter, because we want to win the game. And the youth team players should go, you broke this tradition, lads, not me. You broke it because you weren't good enough, so get in the team by proving you're worth it.
But following that logic, you get to a point where you will coldly analyse someone like Marcus Rashford and say, you're not good enough to get into the team enough, we're paying you quite a lot of money, therefore we want to sell you.
Yeah, and we've actually, the sentimentality thread has worn so thin with you. You've been given extra chances,
but
you didn't take them. And you just need people to come in and go, who's next? Is it going to be Rangnick who's doing that? Like, it'd be the list of players. If you can get rid of Martial, and if you can get rid of, they're talking about sending out a couple of the younger players on loan who they really want to get back. Like, I don't know. It's just a very interesting period of Manchester United now, where they're trying to be modern, but at the same time they don't quite know how to do it, and they've given somebody an interim contract, so they're a little bit pregnant. Doesn't work.
No, and it probably is the sort of club right now that needs someone to grasp the nettle and take some sort of strong control. But I thought that Rangnick was going to be that guy. I thought that the strong control was actually going to be through like a more regimented style of play, not necessarily like a Jose Mourinho sort of, I guess, putting the straitjacket on the players, but just a more formulaic way of playing that can still inspire a bit of creativity here and there. And that's been a struggle in the early stages. But given how much of a basket case the club has been, and the club, not just a team, the club has been over the last little while, surely we are rushing to conclusions way too quickly here on someone like Ralph Rangnick.
I think you're right. I do think you're right, because I don't think he's been given a transfer window to get his players in, or players who will fit his style of play. But when you say you thought he was going to be the man to grasp the nettle, like, maybe he is, but he hasn't been given the job title to do that.
Yeah, that Manchester United as a club haven't grasped the nettle by appointing an actual full-time manager. They're still on social media referring to this guy as the interim manager and going out of their way to,
or saying like, he's going to be our head of recruitment, and he is managing the team now. He's going to recruit the next manager, and he's going to recruit all the players that the next manager works with in conjunction with that manager. That would be kind of but they've said he'll have a consultancy role for the next 2 years. What's that?
Like, what is? I mean, is
that sitting at home, like, you know, with your popcorn and your wine, going, that guy's no good, that guy's very good, he's not bad, you just sign him, playing a bit of football manager and going, oh, this kid at 16 at Birmingham who's going to be available in 8 weeks, you should sign him. Like, is that what it is, or will he be at the training ground in his gear working with the coaches? I don't know, and they weren't very clear about that. So do you think Ronaldo is looking at him going, you're very important to my legacy, very important that I work with you? Or is Ronaldo going, what am I here for, you know?
Yeah, once they get to a better project potentially soon. But like, when has as a consultant in football worked? Like, give me the best consultant. Like, I mean, it does feel like
did Cruyff help Pep?
Maybe Cruyff.
Now, he might have been. Was he president?
I don't know.
Did he have an official title at that stage though? So I mean, that's different. Like, were there guiding hands at Liverpool through the boot room? But there weren't. They like everybody said, that was it Paisley or Fagan who used to come back and still be at the training ground years later, and everybody's like, oh.
If you've got a strong manager who has got a strong dressing room, who are playing in keeping with the traditions of the club, even as makey-uppy as that sounds in itself, you probably shouldn't need someone to consult with. Like, I mean, it's great to have help around the club and have as many experts in various fields as possible. you shouldn't need to consult with Ralph Rangnick next season if you're a good Manchester United manager.
Well,
now, granted, recruitment and the technical development is different.
Okay, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no,
because that's the bit that they've screwed up.
Yeah, and
if you trace it back, it's paying too much money to players who weren't worth it. That has massively inflated the wage bill. That has created this sense of entitlement to these players who aren't hungry anymore. So, like, if you literally go back to Radamel Falcao and Schweinsteiger, all these players who arrived in on 5-10 million a year, whatever it was, like at least 5 million a year and probably 10 million a year in some cases, they're sitting around the changing room going, well, this is great. We don't even have to win here. We never win. What is it? 1 FA Cup and a Europa League since Ferguson left. Is that the sum total of the trophies?
EFL Cup as well, I think. League Cup.
So no winning culture, no prerequisite to achieve stuff, everybody getting paid. And then the youth team players come in and Jay Lings gets his contract and another one, and Rashford comes in and gets his contract, and Greenwood comes in and gets his contract, and everybody sits around on the fat contracts looking at Alexis Sanchez going, well, you're on 20 million a year. 20 million a year. It's a lot of money.
Yeah,
like it's real. It's real. They're sitting side by side with somebody who's doing nothing constructive for the team, and Pogba comes in, and even De Gea was like the highest paid goalkeeper in the world, and was like went through that period of time where the ball was getting in at the near post, like he had kind of rubber arms. So it's the recruitment, I would argue, that has been the worst part of it. And so if Rangnick is the man to fix that, then let's be having it and get rid of those players now. Like if it's going to cost you money, they're bitter about how little they got for those players in the past. But how many of them went on to have anything like a good career? I mean, maybe Memphis you could have got more money for. I don't know, because he's had an okay career after he left. But has anybody else gone on and been an absolute star? Maybe I'm missing out on somebody.
Like the
Mkhitaryan doing okay? I don't know.
What's the opposite of papering over the cracks? Like like covering something that's actually good. Like is that how bad the recruitment's been, that Alexis Sanchez has? So the trend of Alexis Sanchez-esque signings for Manchester United have actually covered over good work that's happened at Manchester United. Have the signings been that poisonous that there's actually been a lot of very good work that we haven't seen? That some of the managers, from Moyes to Van Gaal, to maybe even Jose Mourinho and Solskjaer, that they've actually done some really good work. And they were going in the right direction and they were taking a step forward, and then all of a sudden they just make a massive misstep in one of the windows and it is 3 or 4 steps backwards, and it just infects the whole culture so badly that no matter what these managers have done in a positive sense, it's just pushed them backwards.
Well, there was no plan. There was never a plan. There was never there was a small plan for a while. We're only going to sign a certain number of young players, but then they'd sign Zlatan and Falcao and those. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. It's like you're buying washed up players who are past it, and you're trying to sign a bunch of kids who never make it near the first team. Like there's been that core group of players, like the Daniel Jameses, who you could argue would actually be relatively useful for them now, but the 25 million was good business in the end. I don't know. I'm very interested to see what the Man United fans think about what the most important, the fundamental problem that they have at the moment. Because ownership gets the blame for a lot of stuff, but actually the Woodward era is now officially ending. Let's see what happens with the new guy.
Yeah, it's it probably will just be one of these situations where all of a sudden things seem fine and maybe we can't even put our finger on what happens. But I think if it happens next season, I think Ed Woodward's legacy is not going to be helped by that whatsoever, because it'll be like, oh, that was a significant change that happened.
And look, maybe it's all being set up for another messianic leader to come in, a Pochettino style figure, a Guardiola style figure. Like maybe the manager will thrive in this scenario where everybody is looking for the leadership and guidance of somebody to come in and rescue things that Rangnick hasn't been able to give, because he's been hamstrung from the get-go with the interim title. I don't know. Do you want to go back quickly to the top 4 in your power rankings?
Yeah. So what did I say again? Oh yeah, number 4 was Mayo, number 3 was Kerry, number 2 was Dublin, and number 1 was Tyrone. I want to see this match this year, 1 against 2. I want to see Tyrone against Dublin this year. I think unless they've gone back to a different sort of format or mixed it up again, it is Ulster winners against Leinster winners in an All-Ireland semi-final. Granted, with a backdoor, that becomes quite a complicated thing, and it may not happen, but I think that's the next step for this Tyrone team, is to go and beat Dublin. I tipped Dublin to win the All-Ireland this year when we were doing our crystal ball at the end of 2021, and I think that they will win the All-Ireland, but Tyrone obviously in at number 1 because they are All-Ireland champions, and there's no reason to take them off just yet.
I don't think there's any reason to take Tyrone off. I think last year was a flowering of Tyrone. Now, things went their way in the All-Ireland final. You know, the break of the ball went their way, but they also crushed Mayo at key moments when they needed to. And I do feel like it's the beginning of this Tyrone team as opposed to the end of it. Like, I mean, you're not looking at Logan and Dooher and saying to yourselves that they're not thinking about this notion around Tyrone being unable to go back to back. Like, if they're a team obsessed with what everybody says about them, and the most uttered phrase about this Tyrone team is that Tyrone can't go back to back, because that was I think a legitimate stick to beat them with in the 2000s, was that they didn't go back to back. I mean, that's it. Quite a lot happened. You know, at various stages, quite a lot happened in those years to explain why they didn't go back to back. And they played in Ulster. Yeah. They didn't have Limerick and Clare and then a Powerpuff Cork team to beat at various stages. There was a back door. Like, let's not forget. Yeah, which they won All-Ireland's coming through. Yeah. Thanks very much. And they also didn't win All-Ireland's coming through the back door as well, you know. Like, there are easier ways to get to the All-Ireland than the Ulster Championship, and the qualifiers is one of those ways. So, like, I mean, I think that this team have everything that's ever been said about them pasted up to the dressing room wall. Healy Park, if you got the keys to Healy Park, the dressing room wall is just papered with articles from OTBSports.com from the power rankings at the start of last year, and people telling Brian Dooher that he can't go back to back. So I think there is every chance that Tyrone are thinking to themselves, that I think they're saying to themselves, people think that we got a fluky All-Ireland last year, is what they're saying to each other right now, and they're like, let's prove those people wrong. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them do it again this year. I just think that there is as much of an incentive, if not greater, from some of the chasing pack. I do think that, like, we lived through last year's championship and didn't fully appreciate the Kerry-Tyrone game, for example. Like, I know it's hard for you to appreciate it, but that was a wild ride. It was a wild ride, wasn't it? Crazy. If you were to, like, make a documentary, Tyrone are out of the championship. Tyrone have withdrawn from the championship. Yeah. Because of COVID. Yeah. There's like a 24-hour window where it's like, this game's not going ahead. Now, we all thought the game was going to go ahead, but that's like classic high-stakes poker. Yeah. And then the match happens, and they're 7-point underdogs. Yeah. And then it's like right there until the best player in the country gets injured and tries to play on, and does play on, and even then it's really on a knife edge. Yeah, it was hard for you to appreciate. It was an incredible game. It wasn't like, and from Morgan's halfway line point to on the other side of things, Clifford and O'Shea actually being outstanding on the day, and Tyrone just shutting down a number of other players. The Stephen O'Brien square ball. I was watching Kerry play Limerick in the McGrath Cup last Wednesday, and I just had this moment where I went into a cold sweat because Kerry got the ball deep into the Limerick half. I think it's David Clifford who hand passes the ball over the keeper's head. Stephen O'Brien palms it into the back of the net. Goal ruled out, square ball, and I just started shaking, went into the fetal position, and was like, I never want to watch Gaelic games ever again. It was the COVID. It was the COVID, yeah, I think. But yeah, it was an insane game, absolutely incredible. And maybe your point about Ulster will be a huge factor when it comes to Tyrone this year as well, because it's not just the incentive for Dublin to get back to the top table, or Kerry and Mayo in the All-Ireland series. Like, Monaghan will be furious with not beating Tyrone last year. Donegal will be furious with how things went for them, and Armagh are the coming force. So I think that there could be problems for them in the Ulster Championship, but they're still at the top of the pile, and like it is always just a sense of the crosshairs being on them when they are All-Ireland champions, particularly pronounced when they're in Ulster. So I agree with you to a point about what happened in the 2000s. All right, we've got to finally a New Year's revolution indeed. Owen admits that Tyrone were indeed the team of the noughties. 8 minutes past 9 this morning. Here's what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio today. We've got OTB Gold at 1 o'clock, the life and times of Johnny Kilban. Dadcast from 3, Neil Mellor's Champions League memories, that's Istanbul 2005. At 4 o'clock, OTB Gold is Barry Ryan. At 6, The Ascent, his book about Irish cycling, and live the show tonight from 7. Up next, we're talking rugby with Cian Tracey.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Have you subscribed to the OTB Football Podcast? If not, here's some of what you've missed over the last week.
You look at the game last night and you think to yourself, this Manchester City team are going to be the first Premier League team to score 10 goals in a match. It is going to happen. We are going to reach that high water mark.
He flicks it over the midfield player's head and then swivels on it and hits it with his foot in the corner, and we're all kind of stood there going, did he actually just do that?
We just put a picture of it up there, and you're in the corner of the screen watching it all unfold. Not closing them down either, I'd say, but there you go.
Subscribe now to the OTB Football Podcast stream wherever you get your podcasts, and download the OTB Sports app.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
Right, it's 9:09 this morning here on OTB AM. We'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. You can tweet us at OffTheBallAM. I'm delighted to say Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent is with us this morning. Cian, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Hey lads, Happy New Year.
Yeah, and to you. We think it's still time to say that. Owen is a bit of a curmudgeon when it comes to saying Happy New Year. But Cian, Happy New Year to you.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Cian.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ger. You're a bit of a Grinch, Owen. Although it is a bit of a kind of a strange limbo period, isn't it? You're kind of wondering if you're gone too far, but I'm going to go with it anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you. Is it going to be a Happy New Year for the Champions Cup? Are we going to have a Champions Cup? We keep saying, yeah, great. This is fine. It's saved, and then suddenly something else crops up. In the last 24 hours, it turns out French isolation rules about travel may actually put the whole thing into limbo this weekend again. What's the latest as far as you're aware?
Yeah, that is definitely a potential that could happen this weekend. It's something I'd heard about last week as well. I think the English clubs have been in direct contact with each other. It's another mess, I suppose, for the tournament organisers. And, I was writing a piece in today's paper that I know that the structure of the tournament has been changed, but normally the games after Christmas, they're defining in terms of, people who have teams who have realistic chances of going all the way. And obviously there's seedings up for grabs as well. So I would say it's probably unlikely that we're going to get a full schedule of games again this weekend, judging from what you're hearing. Fingers crossed it doesn't impact the Irish provinces, but obviously if the English teams, certain teams don't travel, then it has knock-on effects for the tournament as a whole. So it affects the Irish teams indirectly. I think the issue that the English teams have is that I believe that under the French government restrictions that the teams would be required to quarantine for 48 hours upon arrival into France. Now, that throws up all sorts of issues. Obviously, teams will have to travel to France much earlier than they would have, potentially have to miss a training session at home. I think the quarantine restrictions that would be implemented are very strict. In other words, like they'd barely be allowed to leave their hotel. Not ideal preparation before a big Champions Cup match. And then I suppose there's issue of the costs involved in that, for the extra night stay or whatever it may be. And you have then the potential risk of someone testing positive for COVID over there, which would mean they would have to isolate for 10 days before being allowed to return to the UK. And I would stress that this is a UK and France issue. I mean, who knows if Brexit is kind of in the background of all this too. So the rules are different for Irish teams. So like Munster, for example, are going to cast, well, hopefully on Friday night. The rules around them are different. But yeah, I think it's certainly lingering in the background, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But yeah, it's not ideal, is it? When you start a new year, you're kind of looking forward that hopefully we're past all that, but we're really not, are we?
No, we aren't, and it looks like we might not be for a long time.
Yeah, like I even saw Ian McGeechan, I think it was, in the paper on Sunday saying that they should just stop this whole thing and start it up again at the end of the season and play it off over a couple of weeks. Like, you'd have to say, Cian, if these fixtures do get impacted the weekend between the English and French clubs, that the tournament is in severe jeopardy because the calendar just doesn't allow for any regular room.
Yeah, and it was the same last year. We had games postponed, and I guess it's probably been heightened more so in Ireland because of what happened to Leinster before Christmas going to Montpellier, because I think a lot of people had kind of forgotten that when Leinster played Toulon last year that it happened to Toulon, and Toulon were only 10 minutes away from the RDS, already had arrived here before they ran into issues. So I think it's probably become a little bit closer to home. Like, you look at Leinster, I mean, they're supposed to be playing Montpellier on Sunday in the return leg, but Montpellier have had cases in their squad for the last couple of weeks. They were supposed to play Toulouse last weekend in the top 14, and that was canned as well. So Leinster's last 4 games have been postponed. They haven't played, I think, since a month to the day, actually, since the 11th of December against Bath. So, like, all indications are at the moment, we haven't heard directly from Montpellier. They had a tweet up yesterday that kind of suggested that they had been back in training. But if worse came to worse and that game was postponed as well, it would mean Leinster's last 5 games have been cancelled or postponed. And that has huge knock-on effects, obviously, for Leinster, for the players, but also for Ireland as well, leading into the Six Nations, when you consider that Leinster are obviously once again going to be the bulk suppliers to Andy Farrell's squad.
Yeah, so it's all a bit grim when it comes to talking about stuff off the field. Let's talk about stuff on the field, and we'll come back to that, and we'll obviously keep everybody updated on that story as it unfolds. The fallout from the Munster-Ulster game and Munster's general form just recently, if Johan van Graan was staying as coach, would we be making such a big deal out of how Munster are playing at the moment, or is it obviously heightened because we're all linking the fact that he's leaving with the way that the team is performing at the moment?
I don't think so. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but like, I've been sort of banging this drum for a while that, like, I just can't see the direction that Munster are going under Johan van Graan. I think some people might use it as an easy stick to beat him with. You can see the pressure, that he's feeling the pressure as well, but I don't think so. I think this has been a case this has been the same story for Munster over the last couple of years, to be honest. So it probably does make it a bit more messy. I mean, none of the players are going to come out and say that, you know, like, it has really thrown everything up in the air, but I don't know, like, I've obviously never been a professional player in a professional dressing room, but I just can't see how it wouldn't be disruptive, not just lose your head coach, but your attack coach as well. So it's messy. I think they do deserve credit for how they got the job done against Ulster last weekend. I think that's probably been glossed over a little bit. There was a lot of young guys there, and I think that is the one big kind of reason to be optimistic about Munster at the moment, is that there are a lot of really good young players in that squad. It's maybe just about getting the right man or men in to kind of nurture them more, because I think we've only seen them come through in probably this season more so than last. And a lot of that has probably been down to the fact that COVID has hit and different things. So there have been a few more opportunities than there might have ordinarily been. But yeah, I do think they deserve some credit. They're like, you look at like the halfbacks, Craig Casey, Jack Crowley, and you know, thinking their way around a difficult game, because Ulster have been going well this season. I'm not saying Munster shot the lights out, but they were down to 14 men for most of the game, and you know, they showed glimpses. There was still the same old kind of problems once they got into 22, but I thought they stuck to the task well. And you know, I mentioned they're going to Cast on Friday night, and they're another team whose progress is probably being glossed over a little bit. Like, they're up to 3rd in the top 14 now, so that's a massive test that they have this weekend, and they're just fighting to, not to save their season would be an exaggeration, because they're going decent in Europe. They won both of their games, but they need, like, Van Graan needs to sign off here on some bit of a positive, because it is in danger of kind of, you know, going out of control and sleepwalking into another kind of season that's going to end trophyless. So there are issues to sort out there, but I think my one note of optimism would be that there's a lot of, I think, exciting young players, even like Thomas Ahern, John Hodden in the squad. So it's just about getting the right person in to nurture them.
What do we know so far, or maybe more to the point, what has Van Graan said to the press so far about his move to Bath? Is it literally just a statement from Bath and a statement from Munster at the time that we have, or has he gone into any great detail about it? Because I think quite famously at this point now, he just basically refused to talk about it on Saturday night.
Yeah, that was an interesting one, because like, my reading of that is, like, and you guys will be well aware of this, coaches and players can be quite snappy in press conferences at the best of times. Now, I suppose in our gig, you guys do a lot of video anyway, so it's easier to put it across, but it can happen when you're trying to put it across in print or online, and it doesn't kind of, you know, it doesn't come across the way it was said. But I don't know, I think, like, the questions that Murray Kinsella asked, like, last weekend were so fair, and like, he would be one of the most respected journalists, I would say, in the game. And I don't know, I think maybe people and Van Graan are forgetting that he's speaking for the fans at home who don't have the opportunity to ask the head coach these kind of questions. And the questions were the questions is exactly what you've asked there, Owen, is what everyone is wondering, like, why are you leaving Munster to go to the Premiership's bottom club? The performances haven't been great over the last couple of weeks. So I was just a bit disappointed that it was so snappy when, Murray Kinsella was doing his job for speaking for the fans. But he did do a press conference to answer your question. I think it was actually the day it was announced, and he did speak about it, but he didn't go into any great detail about it. I mean, I'm sure everyone is aware at this stage, but it's worth reminding everyone that he had signed a new contract, and then something changed in the period from when he signed the contract to when he invoked the 6-month release clause, and that is the big question. What happened between when he signed the new contract and when he decided, no, I'm out of here at the end of the season? We haven't had answers to that. There's been some suggestion that he hasn't been happy with outside forces and things like that, but we don't know that that's the case for sure, because he hasn't elaborated on it, which is why I go back to my point that it was a totally fair question to ask. And I was happy it was asked in such a big platform, because, like I said, if me or someone else had asked that in a press conference and you're trying to put that into print, it doesn't come across, how snappy it was. So I think the mask probably slipped a little bit from Van Graan there, because, to be fair to him, he has always been decent in his media dealings. He never gives much away. He doesn't ever show much emotion, which, I know Peter Stringer had a right cut off him immediately after the interview on TV. But that's kind of been his way all the time. He's never really shown too much emotion when they win, when they lose. But there's no doubt that the criticism has really stung, because it's all well and good for someone like me to have a go at Munster or Munster's style of play. But when someone like Keith Wood on off the ball, who, to be fair, is always really level-headed and measured in his analysis, when he comes out and makes such strong points that he did, I think that will really have stung Van Graan, and also probably the higher ups in Munster as well, that you have people like this, Stringer coming out, Donal Lenihan. These are big names, big, former players, legends of the game, really. So he's definitely feeling the pressure, and he probably let that show a little bit, I think.
Simon Zebo signed a new deal. Ben Healy signed a new deal, but it's only for a year as well. That's interesting. If you're Healy, you obviously have an eye on making sure that you're getting game time at this early stage in your career to continue evolving. And it seems a little bit, I don't know on whose side it was only a year. Maybe the IRFU/Munster were like, we're going to give you a year to see how you go. Maybe Ben Healy was like, I only want to give you a year because either I'm going to play or I'm not, and if I'm not, I'm going to move on. It's an interesting and important kind of pivotal contract for Healy.
Yeah, well, he actually signed a 1-year deal last year as well, when his contract was up for renewal. And I don't know, you probably remember it, but he's Scottish qualified. I think it's through his mother. And Glasgow and Gregor Townsend were sniffing around him probably around this time last year when his contract was up for renewal. And he only opted to sign, as far as I know, there was a bigger deal on the table, but he only opted to sign a 1-year deal. Now, my reading of that would be, of course, that he's keeping his options open. So he was up for interview a couple of weeks ago, and he had said that he was happy enough with the way the contract negotiations were going. In other words, I have signed my contract, it just hasn't been announced yet. But I was pretty surprised that it was only a 1-year deal. He's getting plenty of game time, particularly at the moment with Joey Carberry out injured. I still think he has a way to go, mind you, to prove that he can take that next step up. But a 1-year deal, it keeps his options open. And like I said, the Scottish links aren't going away anytime soon. But if he feels like we're not privy, obviously, to the negotiations that are going on. Last year, players had to take pay cuts. It's the landscape is looking similarly grim at the moment, as we've discussed. So maybe the terms weren't as great as what he could have done. I know it's probably not a fair comparison, but you look at what Tadhg Furlong did in signing a 1-year deal last year as well, and now he's gotten a bumper contract. So maybe Healy is hoping that he does make the most of Joey Carberry being out for the next few weeks, and by the time he comes to renew his contract later this year, that he'll get better terms and sign on for 2 or 3 years. So it keeps his options open, and it might be a clever move on his part.
Okay, it looks like Damien Delende is going back to Japan, and that Munster already have signed a big name replacement. Is Fekitoa at the same level as Delende?
I'm not sure. I don't know if that's a foregone conclusion either.
Okay.
I think the interest is definitely significant, but my understanding of the situation is that Fekitoa is not short of options.
Right.
So, which is hardly a surprise, like a former All Black. On his day, he's absolutely class, but I think over the last couple of years, his days have probably been few and far between. He's had his injury problems as well. Like, there's no doubting his class, but it's been, like, Dialende has been really, really good for Munster, but I just can't get away from the sense that maybe they haven't gotten the best out of him. I mean, you're talking about currently one of, if not the best 12 in the world. Robbie Henshaw might have something to say about that. But yeah, I just, like, he's been really good, but I just don't feel like Munster have gotten the best out of him. It looks like, yeah, he'll probably go back to Japan. There's no doubt Munster are in the market for an overseas centre to replace him. Fekitoa is definitely one of the options, but there's probably a bit of work to be done yet, I'd say, to get it over the line, because you'd imagine Fekitoa will have interest from France, from Japan, and it just depends on what kind of money Munster and perhaps the investors are going to stump up again for, you know, a player who has had his injury problems. They could be a bit burnt by what's happened to Georges Neumann.
Yeah. It's a kind of a weird scenario where the new head coach might inherit a big money signing, or maybe Graham Rowntree gets the gig and he's like, I need a big number 12 who's going to replace Dialende, and he's delighted with it. It's some certainty to who the next Munster coach is going to be would be great for everybody. You know, certainly it's very strange. I think we were talking about this a few weeks ago before Christmas. I mean, who is doing the recruitment? You'd have to assume it's the Professional Games Board and the chairman, but even in terms of Graham Rowntree, and there's absolutely no doubting how good he is as a forwards coach, but who's to say that Munster don't go down the route of promoting Rowntree, which would be a risk as well. Like, let's not forget, he hasn't been a head coach. So, but who's to say whoever they do get in has their own forwards coach that they've been working for the last few years. So it's all a bit messy and, you know, hard to know what's going on. Same with, like, you know, signing Fekitoa, a coach. The new coach could come in and have very different ideas about how he wants to play, and, like, while there's no doubting their class, it's all a bit messy and probably sums up the weird situation that Munster are in at the moment.
Like, it is really interesting. Like, I do feel, maybe this is kind of like obliquely connected to what we're talking about here, but yesterday I was kind of making the point that maybe Van Gran is copping a lot of flack from frustrated rugby fans in Ireland, Munster fans as well, for things that maybe he doesn't deserve flack for, and it kind of feels that, you know, he's done this thing where he has announced that he's going to jump ship in the middle of a season, and what he would say is that this is how rugby always works, that, you know, people line up their next move months and months in advance and it's announced publicly. But at the same token, Cian, Munster should really have something lined up in the relatively near future, shouldn't they? Like, I mean, this idea that Johan van Graan is a lame duck manager can only frustrate you so much, because unless Munster actually have their ducks in a row, then there's no one else to come in and actually take his job as a lame duck unless they've actually announced it.
And the IRFU allowed him to put that clause in the contract, so they must have had a contingency plan. Okay, that's our plan. It gives us the option to get rid of you if you have a crap 6 months. But if you have a better option, what's our plan? Like, presumably David Nucifora has a plan here, right? I mean, he always has a plan.
Yeah, and like it's worth remembering that 6 month break clause is in, as far as I'm aware, is in all of the contracts for coaches. So we did speak about that before. So it's not like it was put into Van Graan's specifically. But I agree with what you're saying, Owen. I mean, where is the contingency plan ultimately now? Obviously, they were caught off guard because Van Graan had signed and had agreed to stay on for 2 more years. But God, like, I mean, if you were a Munster supporter, like, how much trust and faith would you have in the people who are making these decisions to get the decision right? Because ultimately they were happy to plod along with Van Graan for the next couple of years, and I think that's where the frustration is probably boiling over in certain fans. I think some of it probably has been over the top, but I think a lot of the most rational, you know, thinking fans, and, you know, that they are out there, like, I think their frustration stems from the fact that Munster's style of play just has not evolved under him. And you know what, I don't think Stephen Larkham is immune to this criticism either. I mean, like, he's ultimately probably been disappointing as well. Like, he's hugely popular with the players, but, like, by all accounts, he's taken more of a hands-on role this season. But, like, we just haven't seen an evolution with him there either. So it's a big it's a big decision, which is obviously stating the obvious. But these people who are making it wanted to continue with the direction that Munster are going in at the moment. And for me, that's a bit of a concern. like I said before with you guys, like it's in my mind, it's a blessing in disguise that Bath came in and probably ultimately trumped what Munster's offer was in terms of the finances, you know, that were involved. Like, obviously I don't know that for sure, but that would be certainly my sense, that he's gotten a lucrative contract in Bath, a nice city, a very good rugby city, as Johan van Gran kindly. I don't think that went down too well with people in Limerick either. But the people who are making this decision probably have it like a free shot now almost to, okay, have a look at the structures. Do we want a director of rugby? Do we want a head coach? Let's try and get it right, because there has been too many chopping and changing of Munster coaches over the last few years. It's something that Keith Earls mentioned in his book as well. So the players, this isn't something that the players want either. Like, they want stability, but there's a big difference between, I would say, stability and standing still. And I think that that's what Munster have been doing for the last couple of years, is they've been standing still. They haven't been evolving.
I do want to just ask you about Ulster and their current standing at the moment. Is there a flakiness in this Ulster team that they just can't shake? Because that was a winning position they put themselves in. They started the game really well. They're up a man. It's like it's the dream scenario in many respects for a coach. It's like your team has just pounded away at the weakness that your opposition showed last week. They've done everything that you've been talking about. Now you've got this advantage of an extra man. Now's your opportunity to go and drag Munster into the deep water and drown them in that game and lay down the marker for the rest of the season. But you can't do it. Why could they not do it?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, Ger. I suppose, like, every time you think our Ulster have turned a corner, and to be fair, they have been very good this season, and like getting wins in Claremont and the RDS is no easy task, and they played really well in both of those games. So I had thought they had turned a corner in that sense, but yeah, it was, like I mentioned earlier, that Munster deserved credit for how they dug out the win, but God, that was really a game that Ulster left behind them. I think they badly missed Stuart McCloskey. I think he's taken his game to new levels this season. I think his partnership with James Hume has been fantastic. I think losing John Cooney didn't help their cause either, like as exciting as a talent as Nathan Duck is. So, but their excuses, really, they shouldn't have needed any excuses. I still think Ulster's attack is quite hit and miss. Obviously it's going through Billy Burns, and I thought it was interesting, you know, he was very honest in his pre-game interview at the weekend, and saying that he has struggled for consistency. You don't often hear a player like that come out and admit it. So I think that is something they need to sort, the attack, because Munster left gaps for them to exploit now, as well as Munster defended for a lot. Inevitably there was going to be space with a man less in the field, and obviously Ulster got the sin bin for Kieran Treadwell in the second half. Didn't help either, but they just didn't look, they didn't show much ambition at all to try and think outside the box to get the better of Munster. And I think that will be a huge source of frustration for Dan McFarlane this week, as they go into a big game as well against Northampton, because they've like Munster, they've been going well in Europe as well, and they'll have their sights set on getting a good seeding going into the knockout stages, if at all we make it that far.
I guess the thing with Ulster and to a certain degree with Munster is, until they actually do it in a big game, in a quarter-final, semi-final, final, then we're always going to have this doubt about them. And maybe that's unfair, because that's the whole nature of sport, and there's always going to be a pecking order. But what we've been told about Ulster in recent seasons is that there is this array of young attacking talent coming through, and that, like, if Cooney goes down, Doak is supposed to be ready to step in, but there's just a little bit of gap between what our expectations are and what they're actually capable of delivering week in, week out, because they are capable of putting in great performances. It just feels like it hasn't been consistent enough yet.
Yeah, and that is the problem. It's consistency. Like, they did lose Dwayne Peel at the end of last season, who was their attack coach. Dan Soper has come in and taken on that role, and you know, maybe there's a few teething issues there. Like, I wouldn't, I mean, they've shown enough this season to suggest that, you know, they are good enough to push on, but it is always kind of a case of Ulster is like, you know, one step forward, two steps back kind of a thing. And there's no doubt that, you know, passing up an opportunity like that for playing most of the game against 14 men at Thomond Park, like those opportunities don't come around too often. And, you know, if they had gotten the win, like that would have been a win in Limerick, in Dublin and Claremont over the last few weeks, which really could have done wonders for their season. So you'd hope that it doesn't totally knock the stuffing out of them. They're definitely good enough to go to Northampton this weekend and win. Claremont then are coming to Belfast the following week. Obviously they'll be gunning for revenge. So it's a big 2 weeks in Ulster's season to kind of get rid of that Munster performance and get back on track in Europe.
All right, Cian, good stuff. We'll leave it there. Thanks a million.
Cheers, lads. Chat to you.
Cian Tracey from the Irish Independent there. OTB AM brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Obviously, we'll keep you up to date with the Champions Cup fixtures and how they pan out at the weekend. And I'll give you details on which ones we're bringing you live over the next few days as well. Tomorrow morning, Keith Wood is back. He's been looking at Ireland's front row depth chart. We'll also obviously talk to him about the fallout from his comments, which were just picked up on and reported and put to Johan van Graan. And it's interesting that those voices are important now when it comes to shaping the conversation around what happens next with this Munster team. We'll also catch up with Catherine Murphy from ABC News in Melbourne ahead of the Australian Open, and there might be a decision made by the Minister with responsibility for immigration, who seems like, you know, one of the worst politicians that you're ever going to come across. So, you know, I mean,
turns out Australia not just a land of sunshine and home and away and beautiful weather and great things happening.
No, it definitely isn't.
I mean, if there's one thing, like, I mean, this. There's one potential positive out of all of this. It's the greater microscope and all that sort of thing from an international perspective.
Owen, Kerry are the most talented team in football. The fact they can't win the All-Ireland raises questions about their attitude, commitment and willingness to really push through any problems they face.
Well, like there's
or Clifford gets injured against Tyrone when the game's in the melting pot and they have a square ball goal ruled out. Maybe that's the difference between them winning the All-Ireland, because I think they would have beaten Mayo in the final.
Well, no, like I said it after they lost last year, that there is a trend with Kerry over the last few years, is that when they've been in a tight game, they've lost it, and there is definitely a trend emerging there. Got a good tweet here from Harry Byrne as well, who's tweeted us to say, could the argument be made that the Dublin sting in the tail was the years after 2014 defeat to Donegal? Best football Dublin played was before this. I know that was 6 in a row, but more teams could win All Ireland in earlier part of the 2010s.
Quite a sting in the tail. A long tail.
Yeah,
giant sting.
It was definitely more
Godzilla size
attractive football before that, and swashbuckling football, but it also came with a massive risk. I see the point, but like, I mean, well, hopefully, I hope, if Harry Byrne is right, then that means that the All Irelands are done.
Up for grabs, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think they're up for grabs regardless. I don't think
there's a famine coming Dublin's way now.
Don't say that. Like, there could be a 3 in a row or something.
Look, I don't know. If all their best players play to their absolute peak, then they're going to be thereabouts. But if those players are like, I've got 6 All Ireland medals, I have life to live.
Yeah.
I'm in my 20s. There's just been COVID for 2 years. We've been locked up. Then, I mean, it's. I
mean, it's not the worst time in the world to be a semi-professional Gaelic footballer. COVID. Like, I mean, what else are you going to be doing with your 20s other than winning All Irelands with Dublin? So maybe it's after COVID.
Well, it's the nights out that you get to go on where you like.
But what nights out?
Well, you miss those.
But like, what nights out of, like, there's been a few of them happening during COVID, like, but
not many, not as many as there would have been.
Well, exactly.
You don't get the perks.
So what I'm saying is that the COVID can be good for Dublin, and the 20-year-olds are penned into this COVID lifestyle, which is conducive to being committed to inter-county football.
That was certainly what Mark Lawrenson was saying about Jesse Lingard when in his time in London at West Ham. It was like, well, he couldn't go out, so all of a sudden his football massively benefited. Right, that is your lot today. Let's bring you this. Jerry Thornley and Fiona Hayes on Monday Night Rugby.
Let's talk rugby. So another off week for Leinster. Connacht the same. We did see Munster beat Ulster at Thomond Park on Saturday evening, and it was 14-man Munster as well, for that matter, for 65 minutes of the game. Simon Zebo sent off for a high hit on Michael Lowry, and they lost Peter O'Mahony to injury in the warm-up. So all in all, a good result under the circumstances for Munster. 18 points to 13. We're joined by Fiona Hayes, who I think was at the game. Hey, Fiona.
Hi, Joe. How are you? I was indeed up in Thomond Park.
Very good. And Jerry Thornley of the Irish Times. Hey, Jerry.
How you doing, Joe? You well?
Yeah, great. We had Fiona on with us and Keith Wood last Wednesday, Jerry, and both were pretty critical of the performances from Munster and were saying pretty strong things about the coaching ticket. And I can't remember really Van Graan going into a game under as much pressure and with as much scrutiny on him. That was very much the context ahead of Saturday night. Probably something we saw reflected in his pre-match interview as well with Murray Kinsella.
Yeah, very much so. You could see he was quite touchy and defensive. I think he's obviously acutely aware of the criticism that rained down in Munster, and particularly himself. I think he's become more of an open target now with the news that he's moving on to Bath, and probably didn't do himself any favours by saying he's looking forward to going to such a great rugby city, given he's coming from Limerick. and then the performance against Connacht, which had been coming in many respects because they'd relied on that pick and jam one-off runners to bully their way to even though early bonus point wins this season. There's been a couple of one-off performances as they were against Scarlets away with something of a cobbled-together team, and again against Wasps with a very much a cobbled-together one-off team, and they played with great freedom on those two occasions, less so on other occasions, particularly not against Connacht with that kind of those 6 penalties in a row, tap and go, and 3 of them against 14 players. And apart from one advantage play when they went wide to Andrew Conway, it was just a sequence of 20 plus pick and jams followed by one-offs, and it just looked so easy to defend against for Connacht, and it passed the initiative over to Connacht. And what little rugby that was played that night was entirely played by Connacht. They fully deserved the win, so they had to come back with something. I think it's a huge win for them because, yes, can you imagine what the fallout would have been if they'd lost last weekend against Ulster?
Fiona, I think if I was being criticised publicly from all quarters, I'd be tetchy too. So I can understand the human side of where Van Graan's head was at in that pre-match interview. However, I'm not sure if that's the best approach for him to take for the next 5-6 months. Like, Murray Kinsella asked him about the move to Bath, for instance, and he said, I've spoken to that before, I'm not going to answer that tonight, it's all about Ulster. And then he was asked about the recent performances. He said, well, we just lost last week, and the previous week we won before that, Murray, if you care to remember. So I think on both counts, he could have very easily steered that a different way. I mean, it struck me, even the Bath question, he said he'd spoken about that before. I haven't really heard him speak about that before. I'm not going in to read the transcripts of Munster press conferences. I mean, given that everybody was at home, and I'm sure RT would have had an audience of at least 200,000, and more importantly, maybe the 30, 40, 50,000 people who routinely go to Thomond Park across a season, I would have thought that's a perfect chance to say, look, I leave with a heavy heart. I've got to do what's best for me, for my family. I know the people in Munster will understand, but trust me, nobody's more dedicated than me for the next 5-6 months, and steer it that way. But I don't think he was in that headspace at all to be, I suppose, a touch more strategic or clever with the media.
No, Joe, I don't think so. And you know what, it was actually funny because it was at the game, but I'm in a few, obviously, rugby group chats on WhatsApp, and my phone started going off about the interview before the game started at all. But obviously I hadn't seen it because I was up at the game with my dad. So it was only when I got home I looked back over it, and I thought it was very strange indeed. And it was actually a lot of Leinster fans that were sending me the text saying that they thought it was absolutely disgraceful the way he was speaking to Murray Kinsella at times as well. His attitude, I think he changed his tune after the game. As Jerry had said, he did face a lot of criticism. I suppose ex Munster players coming out and saying, maybe it's time for him to move on and as such. And even though, like, coaches probably say they don't listen to that criticism, I'm sure it was in the back of his head, and he was probably feeling, I don't know, you could see he was a bit on edge. But I do think after the game he's probably a bit more softer, and we saw a softer side to him. But I certainly didn't think it was great. I mean, 5,000 people absolutely freezing up in Thomond Park, everyone watching at home. It would have been a great time for him to just throw it on the line and say, look, I'm moving on, but I'm here and I'm going to push my best foot forward till I'm gone. I'm going to give everything in the role. So I did think it was quite strange. Yeah, because Jerry, this was not, Murray Kinsella was not taking an extremely tough line of questioning and saying, well, how can you concentrate on Munster if you've got one eye on Bath and, maybe it's time to step aside. These were very open, fair, routine questions, I would say. Your assessment of Van Graan and the media generally, I'd have him as a fairly, and I mean this in a good way almost, like a fairly forgettable performer, and that he's always fairly measured and doesn't get himself into hot water generally.
Yeah, definitely, very much so. And he's always very polite normally as well. And, he's forthcoming with his answers. They're generally much longer than that. They're not normally, he's not noted for his brevity. That was quite a brief answer. I think to cut him some slack, Joe, what he meant by saying, look, I've spoken about that before. I mean, I've been asked about that before, and I've consistently said I don't want to talk about that when I'm here at Munster. And if you go through all his press conferences, every time he has been asked about his contract position and whether he's going to renew or not, and when he had it, he's always been very consistent in just playing a dead bat. It's just not something he wants to discuss in the public domain. I think to cut him a little bit of slack, that's what he meant. And he wasn't going to suddenly change tack 10 minutes before at Thomond Park a week after losing a derby and suddenly go into his reasons for moving to Bath. So while it was a perfectly legitimate question for Murray to ask, I think that's where he was coming from. The one about a few disappointing performances, you worried about Munster's form, that was a tetchy enough response to say that, well, actually, yeah, we lost last weekend, but we won the weekend before. I don't think he did himself many favours in that pre-match press interview with Murray, but I think, in fairness to him, that's where he was coming from. It's not something he would ever wants to discuss publicly. He wasn't going to change tack now.
And they're very good points to make, I think. I don't want to nitpick overly. It was just a very eye-catching exchange. And I do have sympathy from Jerry, because I do suspect he feels the mood has turned, that there's this combination of, well, you're leaving us anyway to go to Bath, and the performances are still so turgid, to use maybe the word Keith Wood used last week. Yeah. So that's a bad combination for him, and I'm sure he's aware of that the winds have changed.
Yeah, I think so. And as interesting in all of this, Joe, is that his own change of heart. Because this is a man who was offered a 2-year deal and signed the 2-year deal before then activating the clause to leave with 6 months' notice. So he had a change of heart himself. And you're right, he hasn't explained why. Maybe he will one day. But it would be interesting to know the exact reasons. Munster is probably not the easiest coaching job in the world. There are a lot of disparate forces behind the scenes between the CEO, the Professional Games Board, and this group of private backers, the 1014 Club, who proportionally half financed the signings of R.G. Snyman and Damien de Allende. I would venture that he maybe finds they're too interfering, or maybe he's not happy with the fact that it looks like Damien de Allende is not going to be re-signed, and maybe R.G. Snyman neither, and he would have liked both of them to be re-signed. I don't know, but it would be interesting. There's clearly a lot of things going on behind the scenes in Munster. All is not what it seems. Like, he clearly loves the Munster job. He has loved working with Munster. That's evident. And yet he's now had a change of heart that he wants to leave Munster to join a team that are bottom of the table in the Premiership. Why? That tells you that all is not right behind the scenes in Munster, in my book anyway. I'd say it's a tough job. You've got the baggage of history, and the demands are very high there. And he embraced this all along, and now suddenly has had a complete change of heart and is walking away. I don't entirely agree with Peter Stringer's assessment that this shows that his heart's not really in it anymore and he doesn't want to be there. What little I do know about Johan van Graan, I don't know on a personal level really at all, but what I do know from talking to people is that he's a very honourable man, and I would be amazed if he doesn't see through his contract to the end of this season. And I would venture that his heart's still very much in it, and he will want to sign off as best he possibly can. And ditto Stephen Larkham. The problem is, if you got rid of Johan van Graan now, who would you replace him with? Would you replace him with Stephen Larkham? Well, he's leaving at the end of the season as well. And then if you remove Johan van Graan, you're coach light on the ticket as well. I would argue that probably causes more upheaval than anything else. In one sense, at least, he's being honourable and he's given them 6 months' notice and he is moving on. At no point did he say, I'm staying, when he wasn't. Unlike his predecessor, Rassie Erasmus, who did say repeatedly, yes, I'm staying, when all along he already knew he was going back to South Africa. Yeah. So you should bear that in mind as well.
And Jerry, that's a very interesting point you make. Just to expand on it for a moment. So it's your understanding or your contention that behind the scenes, Munster is a more complicated, maybe slightly more dysfunctional beast than the other provinces?
Yeah, I would say so, Joe. I would be very, very, very surprised if Leo Cullen or Stuart Lancaster have any outside interference upon them. You know, let's say they're very much given a free hand to select, pick, coach the team. They have a specialist there in Guy Easterby who looks after contracts. I would venture that it's a smoother running machine, more harmonious off the pitch. Munster is. And
you're talking there about the group who privately raised the money for the marquee signings.
Yes, exactly. I think that when you have a body like that, they perhaps might want more influence on things that would be necessarily healthy.
Fiona, what do you hear about Munster behind the scenes, if anything?
Beg your pardon?
I was asking Fiona, what do you hear about Munster behind the scenes, if anything?
Yeah, well, no, there's I wouldn't hear much about stuff like that. Obviously, I know there is money gone in from outside that 10-14, and I understand that, and I would imagine if there's people heavily investing that they then, I suppose, would seem like they have a right in certain in when they find issues, or they would bring issues to. So for a coaching staff, I would imagine it is hard when you're trying to concentrate, especially now when there's other stuff going on in the media outside. I would imagine it could be quite hard. I think there was something also said in as well, wasn't there, over in South African TV, Victor Matfield was heard saying something, a couple of things about maybe outside influence that he had relayed that to him. And also, I think there was a comment on Leinster get all the good players, which I thought was absolutely crazy, seeing as they're probably all from, a lot of the players are born and bred in Leinster anyway. But I know there was a couple of things said on South African TV, and I think he's been asked about that as well, but there hasn't been any comments made about that.
Yeah, Matfield relaying a conversation he said he'd had with Van Gran. I'm sure Joey Carberry crossed several people's minds when we heard that. And Jerry, just the last one, because it's all very interesting. The workings of rugby are often less apparent than football clubs, which are more straightforward, because we're talking about centrally contracted players, and the IRFU have a big say in things. As I understand it, the IRFU will have the majority say in who the next head coach is. Are the IRFU pleased, displeased, neutral when it comes to Munster relying on private money to fund the likes of Diolande, or are they perfectly happy for Munster to go and raise money like that privately?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that to some degree, these talking to people, that the IRFU regard Munster as a little bit of a problem child. And I think that, for many years, Gareth Fitzgerald served there as CEO, and he had a magnificent way of pulling all the different strands in Munster together and making them feel that they all had a big major say in how things were being done. When in actual fact, he was generally calling the shots at the end of the day. He was, I think, that more with each passing year, the late Gareth Fitzgerald, Lord rest his soul, his presence as CEO will be missed more and more. I'm not saying Ian Flanagan's doing a bad job. I don't know, but it's just a very difficult organisation to put it all together. And I think Gareth was a master at that. I'm not sure if also Munster have got their financial issues that everybody freely talks about. They still got that stadium debt, which looks like a real liability for the union as well. They've been bailed out in the past. I don't know whether they will be again. They certainly wouldn't be capable of signing the likes of RG Snyman and Damien de Allende were it not for private backers, given their financial position. And they have been a little bit unlucky because Snyman, has played so little rugby in the last 2 seasons that he could have been a Will Skelton type figure for them. We've seen glimpses of it. Imagine if he'd just stayed fully fit for the last 2 seasons. As the same with Diende, who's been a brilliant signing for them when he's played, and he's played regularly for them. So, yeah, it's. I think the IRFU certainly will have the final say in who the new head coach will be. David Nucifora will have the final say in that. I don't know who will go about identifying it within the Munster setup. I believe the chairmanship of the Professional Games Board has changed recently, and there's an interim chairman there at the moment. So it's not really clear who's really calling the shots there. But I do think Nucifora will have a big say in who the head coach is. The head coaches in all the 4 provinces, Joe, are employed directly by the IRFU. Yeah. They are IRFU appointees, and contrary to the IRFU, the assistant coaches are hired by the provinces. I don't know if that's necessarily the best system in the world, but that's the way it works.
Yes. And isn't that why we almost have a system whereby, even though you would look at Leinster and say, well, Leo Cullen's a director of rugby and Stuart Lancaster's the head coach, the RFU don't employ director of rugby, so Leo's the head coach and Lancaster, whatever his title is his title. These are the kind of weird machinations that go on.
Yeah, it's interesting how Munster move forward from this. Do they need a head person over the head coaching ticket, like a director of rugby? Like, could the load on Van Gran have been eased by some kind of figure like that? And would they benefit from a Gaisby type figure just to look after contracts as well? Quite possibly so. I think this might well be part of the whole. This is an opportunity now when they come over the next 6 months, when they devise a new coaching ticket, to maybe devise a slightly remodeled structure as well.
Mm. And a last one for me, and then we'll go to Fiona, who can lead us on the actual rugby on the weekend, bring her extra expertise there. But this is all very interesting. Would it be the case that Leinster, Connacht, Ulster would privately finance players as well? Like, I seem to have memories of certain deals being done with businesses to keep certain players at Leinster or to fund their contract in part. Like, that's the private investment is across the board, or no? That one's for you, Jerry. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, that's for me. But yes, there is private investment across the board. I would venture that it's slightly done differently. It's more upfront in terms of when Leinster say, and the RFU re-signed Johnny Sexton, it was obviously that Dennis O'Brien's the deal with Johnny becoming an ambassador for, I think, was it Aer Lingus and so on and other things. So that it's sweetened in that sense. They got private backing for the actual facilities in UCD that they moved into, the new state-of-the-art facilities. That's where they got their backing. And most of these private investors like to stay fairly low-key. That's the way they prefer it. But yeah, there's a degree of that going on behind the scenes with all of them, no doubt.
Okay. Fiona, to the rugby. So you were in the stadium. I don't know what conditions were like. It looked treacherous pre-game, and then it calmed down for a while, and then seemed to be messy enough at times during the game. Rob Herring scores a try in 8 minutes, and then Simon Zebo sent off. That's alarm bells then, I would think.
Yeah, definite alarm bells. The first 20 minutes in general, I thought Munster were very poor. The decision making, discipline was rolling off the back of last week's loss to Connacht. There was some things, they weren't very cohesive. There was a lot of kicking the ball away again. But I think after Zebo sending off, maybe 15, 20 or about 5 minutes after that, I think things started to settle down. I thought Jack Crowley settled into his role. Yeah, he kicked straight into the touch or straight out for a line out back in the 22 in the first maybe 10 minutes. And I thought, his nerves were going to get him, but I thought they settled down and obviously had to pull together after that Zebo. So conditions weren't as bad as they looked, because I actually rewatched the game when I got home that evening, and being up there was quite chilly, but the wind wasn't as bad as I've seen in Thomond Park before. So definitely wasn't conditions. Bit of rain, but nothing too hectic.
And Fiona, when you say bad decisions being made by Munster in the first 20 minutes, what kind of things jump out to you or irk you or strike you as bad decisions?
Yeah, just similar stuff like penalties they were giving away, not rolling away again. I think even just general play, they kept it really narrow. I was on the opposite side of the stadium and they were over at the right, and there was so much space on the left, and they were one out runners again in the middle of the park going off on their own. Coombs went a couple of times, other players, and there was just so much space. And as I said, the wind wasn't that crazy and they just didn't seem to exploit that space at all. And the one time I suppose it did come out the wing, and I think Zebo he'd been down just before that. It looked like he maybe was getting a finger pushed back in, jumped up to his feet, came in then slightly after that with the high tackle. So just discipline in general was very bad, and the tightness of rugby that they were playing. They weren't, we talked all week in the media about maybe that, they weren't trying things we'd seen them doing earlier in the season with the young guys playing. The team sheet looked exciting, and for those first 20 minutes it was very, very narrow, one out roars, and hopefully the game went on and we saw a bit of a change in that, definitely in the last 20 minutes of the game anyway.
There was a point at some stage in the first half where Munster were camped in the Ulster 22 and they kept going one-off runners and narrow, and Donald Lenihan certainly on the TV commentary was saying that Mike Haley is screaming for the ball out wide and there's so much space out wide. Now Fiona, I've seen, I was once Eddie O'Sullivan did a presentation for us at a roadshow on tactics, and he was explaining when you get in so close to a try line, it's perfectly fair to just keep picking and jamming, because if you start passing back you lose so many metres, and eventually if you keep picking and going you'll get over the line. So there's a real argument for it, and yet I think all of us would love to see the ball be flung out wide to Mike Haley and to show a bit more ambition in those moments, and it feels like Ireland even have started to do that of late. What's your perspective on that? You were in the stadium, you would have had a good bird's eye view of the space that was or wasn't available.
Yeah, picking and going is completely. I do a lot of that work with my own teams, right? And obviously with the ball carrier, the biggest thing is you need to be square. You need to be making ground. You need to be carrying hard but square. And I found at times Munster were picking and going from the side, and they weren't squaring up when they were going into that contact. And that's fine, right? And you can keep doing that, and they were getting knocked back and back. So I think it comes to a stage where your whole aim is perhaps to either go forward, nice and square, get ground, go over the try line, or else you're trying to suck that defence in. And I felt like they did suck the defence in at times, but then they just didn't have the vision to then get it out to the backs, who were absolutely screaming for the ball. So I don't like having policies as a coach, but in general, I'd tell my pack they'd have maybe 2, 3, 4 pick and goes, and if not, and they've created that defensive narrowness, the 9 needs to get it out and give the lads a shot out wider.
So you use the word vision there. It can't be vision, because there's only 5,000 in the stadium and the backs are screaming and you've time to look up. So it's a decision. It's not that they're not seeing those players out wide. They're actually deciding, let's keep doing what we're doing here. So it's like an inherent kind of pragmatism or even conservatism, let's be honest.
Yeah, definitely too conservative. I mean, it's definitely too conservative. And you know what? Actually, when I was looking at it in that first half, I was thinking back to the Connacht game, and I thought to myself, surely they've worked on this from the end of the first half in the Connacht game. Surely they've looked at this video. They've looked at how they're running. They're squaring up, maybe popping out a little bit further, maybe getting the forwards having a couple of steps before they take on that ball. And it just seemed to be very, very similar to that Connacht game. Yes, they were getting ground at times, but they eventually got to exactly like you were saying, where they got that goal. They had 2 or 3 quick consecutive picks and goes. Ulster defence came in nice and narrow, and there was just absolutely nobody that caught Craig Casey. Wasn't pushing forwards out of the way to get it out wide. They just seemed happy to keep doing the exact same thing over and over.
Yeah, because Jerry, we're talking here like Munster lost and they didn't, so it's worth stating that ultimately they do go wide in the second half for Haley's try, and ultimately they do win the game with 14 men. I suppose the moments we're analysing there with Fiona, and it's very interesting to get her perspective, they're the moments that almost worry you as the season progresses, that conservatism will come back to bite Munster on the bigger days.
Completely and utterly. That is the thing. And that's why even when they were racking up the bonus point wins at Thomond Park against South African opposition early in the season, it was nearly all through this tactic, one-off runners now and pick and jam. And look, you're right, it's not a black and white case. It's not an exact science. Leinster are uber efficient at this one-off drives as well and pick and go and getting over the line, not least because they've got such an array of dynamic front rowers and strength to score from close range. It's yielded a bucket load of tries for Gavin Coombs already in his fledgling career. And in fairness to to Craig Casey, he went wide once to Andrew Conway in that siege before half-time against Connacht, just that Jake Heen covered the ground that time, whereas Michael Larry left himself with too much ground to cover for the Mike Haley try. For me, though, what was really great to see was the way they won the game at the end. They're down to 14 men. There's no doubt Ulster didn't do enough to win the match. Ultimately, they only scored 6 points against 14 men. And there's a story here about how much Ulster left this one behind. It's like they were so fired up, they were almost better off against 15 men, because then when they're up, you see Simon Zebo getting sent off, and they've got 65 minutes left to go, oh, we should really win from here. And it seems like they got a little bit frozen headlights. They kicked poorly entering the last 10 minutes. You have the overcooked box kick by Nathan Doak, which Mike Haley fields. And then the game pivots entirely on Michael Larry had a fine game. He miscues that up and under, which Chris Farrell fields in the halfway line.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.